I call this meeting to order. This is the 80th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Our orders of the day, pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, continuing our pre-budget consultations for 2012. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. We have two panels. In the first panel, we have 6 organizations who are presenting. First of all, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Secondly, the Canadian Doctors for Medicare. We have the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Ensuite, Regroupement des Jeunes Chambres.
Regroupement des Jeunes Chambres de Commerce du Québec, Société de Transport de Montréal. Et
Saskatchewan. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and then we will have questions from members. And we will begin with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We very much appreciate the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Dave Collier. I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, or CAP. We have representatives from Encana and Shell also in attendance at the committee this afternoon, I think reinforcing the importance of our submission. We have a single recommendation for your consideration in the next federal budget, that being a change in the federal tax treatment of liquefied natural gas liquefaction or LNG liquefaction facilities to tax class 43, which is a 30% declining balance, from tax class 47, which is an 8% declining balance. In our view, this reclassification would do several things. First, it would harmonize the treatment of LNG liquefaction with other comparable manufacturing and processing facilities and equipment, for example, straddle plants. It would enhance the competitiveness of the Canadian LNG export industry and thereby encourage economic growth. And it would positively influence near-term final investment decisions for LNG liquefaction facilities. I think as the committee is aware, the natural gas market is undergoing significant change. Shale gas supply is abundant, and it will provide Canadians with a long-term reliable supply of an affordable and cleaner burning fuel. This abundance of supply relative to demand has put downward pressure on natural gas prices and increase the imperative for Canada to develop new international markets through LNG export opportunities, particularly from the coast of British Columbia. This will provide both additional demand for Western Canadian natural gas and provide access to global natural gas pricing. Canada's LNG export facilities will be among the greenest in the world, and LNG exports to Asian markets will displace the use of more carbon-intensive fuels in those markets. For all of those reasons, we think it's in Canada's interest to develop a sustainable LNG export industry. If I turn now to the specific tax treatment for LNG liquefaction facilities, in our view, LNG liquefaction is a manufacturing and processing business, not unlike straddle plants. These facilities are complex, and much more technical detail is provided in our submission. But the bottom line is that LNG liquefaction facilities process input sales gas, resulting in changes to both chemical composition and physical characteristics in order to manufacture marketable LNG and NGL products. In doing so, they meet the test of M&P, which means that they should be included in tax class 43 rather than in tax class 47. And we presume that LNG liquefaction was not contemplated when class 47 was amended to cover the much simpler regasification process of LNG import facilities, as the potential for export of significant volumes of natural gas from Canada was not contemplated at the time that those changes were made. And just very briefly, in a global competitive context, I think as you're aware, the world demand for LNG continues to grow, especially in Southeast Asia. Canada can participate in those markets, but I think it's fair to say we face stiff competition as well in terms of supplying Asian markets, both from established LNG exporters in Australia and the Middle East, as well as from emerging LNG suppliers. The current Class 47 tax classification puts Canadian LNG liquefaction facilities at a significant disadvantage relative to competitors in both the U.S. and Australia. It takes about 27 years to write off 90% of an asset under Class 47, as compared to about 13 years in the U.S. or Australia, and about 7 years under the proposed tax class 43. So, having said that, class 43 would make Canadian LNG liquefaction facilities much more competitive on an international basis. Timely development of Canada's LNG export facilities is also an imperative. I think, as you're aware, there are a number of proposed facilities on the books. We're operating in a very competitive international market, and this tax class reclassification would positively influence those upcoming investment decisions. So to summarize, in our view, Canada has a unique opportunity to diversify its natural gas markets through development of a sustainable LNG export industry. This will support investment and jobs in Canada and supply reliable, cleaner burning natural gas to the growing economies of Southeast Asia. I believe we can compete with the best in the world, and the tax reclassification that we're talking about for LNG liquefaction facilities will help to enable those significant investments in Canada. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from Canadian Doctors for Medicare.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the rest of the committee for having us here today. My name is Dr. Daniel Raza. I'm a family physician here in Ottawa, and I'm here on behalf of Canadian Doctors for Medicare. We're an organization that represents physicians across Canada, as well as citizens who support a strong public health care system. We conduct research, advocacy, and education activities in support of an equitable, accessible, and improved public health care system. In regards to the federal government's next budget, we have three main recommendations for improvement. Firstly, we believe that this government should commit to establishing a 2014 health accord. Secondly, we believe that the Canada Health Act should be enforced across the country. And thirdly, we believe that the federal government should commit to a strong role in promoting healthcare innovation. All three impact our ability to have an efficient and sustainable healthcare system that provides the best value for taxpayer money. With respect to our first recommendation, we're concerned that the federal government has walked away from its role in a 2014 health accord. Healthcare is more about dollars and cents, and our country is more than a collection of provinces. But there is a role for the federal government in healthcare. It helps ensure that Canadians can count on quality care wherever they live and wherever they travel within the country. Without national leadership, the quality and levels of service of healthcare in Canada will depend on each province, not on the universal healthcare system that Canadians expect to be there for them. The 2003-2004 health accords were landmark developments in Canada, but over the past 10 years, there's been mixed progress. For example, in some parts of the country, there has been success in reducing wait times for certain procedures, but this has not happened uniformly across the country. There's been little progress on a national pharmaceutical strategy to reduce costs and increase access to drugs. In addition, there was weak accountability for results. The accord provided for large transfers of money to provinces without enforceable conditions for delivery of outcomes. We urge the federal government to initiate the timely development of a new 10-year health accord negotiated jointly to ensure that it reflects the needs of all regions and also reflects the priorities that we share as Canadians. We would also add that monies from any new accord should be conditional on adherence to the Canada Health Act, which leads to our second recommendation, and that is the need to enforce the Canada Health Act with respect to illegal extra billing. The evidence is mounting that many for-profit providers of healthcare are charging patients for additional services tied to their medically necessary and already publicly insured services. In some cases, private surgical facilities, such as the Cambie Clinic in BC, are making millions of dollars by openly charging patients to jump the queue ahead of other needy patients on public wait lists. We know that many Canadians feel that wait times are too long, and we agree. In fact, there is evidence that wait times can improve. But allowing those with the ability to pay to jump in front of the line is not a solution. The federal government has a responsibility to ensure that all Canadians have equitable access to care, and Canadians expect that the laws of their land be enforced. Extra billing is expressly prohibited in the Canada Health Act, and the federal government has a responsibility to work with provinces to ensure that this practice does not take place. We ask the federal government to meet this expectation. Our final recommendation asks for federal leadership to help identify smart innovations in Canada and scale them up across the country so that our best practices are not limited to isolated projects in single hospitals or clinics. For example, in a pilot project, the Alberta Bone and Joint Institute was able to reduce wait times for hip and knee surgeries from 82 weeks to just 11 weeks, and with better patient outcomes. In Saskatchewan, they're learning from the experience of Nova Scotians and their success with a collaborative emergency center system in rural areas that is helping connect patients to doctors, and in fact cutting wait times to see doctors from 6 weeks to 3 days.
1 minute.
Thank you. These are key successes, and there's more, and we need to scale up these innovations. The federal government is in a key position to push for this kind of reform through a renewed health accord. And we also see room for national leadership in evidence and translation to provide the highest quality care possible. For example, according to the Canadian Association of Radiologists, as many as 30% of CT scans and other imaging procedures are inappropriate or contribute no useful information. A national body tasked with continuously reviewing the evidence and issuing guidance to healthcare providers similar to NICE, N-I-C-E in the UK, would likely improve the quality of Canadian healthcare and save money. The federal government must be involved in setting standards and applying the best of our knowledge across the country. We urge the committee to consider these issues as it develops the next federal budget. Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from the Public Service Alliance of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, for allowing me the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Chris Aylward. I'm the National Executive Vice President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. The Public Service Alliance of Canada represents the majority of federal government workers in Canada. More than 172,000 people who deliver crucial services and programs to Canadians across the country. Since the 2012 budget was tabled in the spring, more than 18,000 of our members have been told they may lose their jobs. They're anxious for their futures and for their families. But they are also worried about what these cuts mean for those who rely on the services and programs they deliver. Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm here today to call upon you to do two things. First, we want this government to reverse course. Federal government cuts are bad for Canadian families, communities, and the economy. Second, we want this government to start listening to Canadians before making decisions. We were encouraged to learn last week that after hearing from communities about how their economies would be hurt, the government backed off its decision to cut the seasons for Canada's waterways and canals. That was a good first step. But now we need the government to do the same for all of Canada's national historic sites and parks, because the communities that depend on them are saying their economies are going to suffer as well. Mr. Chair, it is clear public services and the workers who provide them are a major contributor to the prosperity of our families and communities. Economists estimate that the last federal budget could amount to the loss of 55,000 public sector and 61,000 private sector jobs across the country. That's bad for our economy. The government needs to listen to people like Mayor Claude Elliott of Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador, who says that losing 30 Service Canada jobs there means losing about $1.5 million a year from their economy, and that's just in salaries alone. He put it best when he told us, and I quote, "When you're out there trying to expand and grow by attracting new businesses to the community, it doesn't give businesses a good sense of profitability when the federal government is out cutting jobs." Or Brad Barkhouse, the owner of a bookstore in Gander, who told us, and I quote again, "When the cuts hit here, it's going to affect my customers. All of the businesses will be affected. There's a snowball effect, and it takes money out of everyone's pocket." The government also needs to listen to Canadians about how these cuts are undermining our health and our safety. As of last week, we had 15 confirmed cases of illness caused by food contaminated with E. coli, food that came from XL Foods slaughterhouse in Brooks, Alberta. This follows a $56 million cut to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's budget. The government says that it's hired 700 new inspectors, but refuses to give anyone a breakdown of where they are. What we do know is that none of these new hires went to inspecting slaughterhouses like the one at XL Foods. And what we also know is that this government continues to push for less hands-on inspections and more self-regulation by the industry. That is putting lives at risk. The government needs to listen to Canadians and recognize that this is not the time to cut back on food safety. The government also needs to stop ignoring people who live and work along Canada's coasts. Last year, we spoke to this committee about lives being put at risk by the shutdown of the St. John's and Quebec City search and rescue stations. And now, BC's fishing, tugboat, and pleasure boat community are protesting the government's decision to shut down the Kitsilano Coast Guard Station in Vancouver. They say that lives will be at risk because calls for help from Vancouver Harbour will now go to Sea Island Station in Richmond, 17 nautical miles
1 minute.
and 35 minutes away. The government needs to listen to what the experts there have to say and reverse that decision too. The government needs to listen to Canada's veterans and reverse its decision to shut down 9 Veterans Affairs district offices across Canada. That includes the one and only office in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And one of our local presidents there told us, again I quote, "The Charlottetown district office has the highest ratio of walk-in clientele in Canada. We deal with veterans who are young and old, but depending on their different abilities and disabilities, a trip to New Brunswick may not even be possible for them." If I had more time today, I could talk to you about so many more examples of how the economy, families, and communities are being hurt by this government. Or I would talk to you about the cuts to the fisheries habitat staff and the shutdown of the internationally renowned Experimental Lakes Research Center. What will that mean for our environment? I urge you to read our full submission, which was mailed directly to you, Mr. Chair, back in August, and which we have distributed here today. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Ensuite, regroupement des jeunes chambres du commerce du Québec.
Now, the regroupement des jeunes chambres, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us here. For now over 20 years, the regroupement has been supporting and growing a strong network of young people's chambers of commerce and youth sections throughout Quebec. The RCJCQ now represents more than 7,000 young entrepreneurs, business people, and professionals from 18 to 40. In addition to covering a vast territory, the RJCCQ also represents a culture-specific organization, which gives it a unique perspective. That's why we have certain concerns in our group. We believe that the demographic and economic changes of the next years will be crucial for the medium and long-term future of the country. We also believe that we have to get these changes underway and maintain the momentum of Quebec. So we would suggest three main strategic points. First, to consolidate what we have. As you know, Canada's economy is based largely on a comprehensive and dynamic system of small and medium enterprises working in all facets of business, from the primary sector to the service sector. These companies are finding it increasingly difficult to maintain a competitive position on the world stage, not to mention that Canada is beginning to see its rate of entrepreneurship decrease compared to its international partners. Without diminishing the role of the big business, our group continues to believe that Canada's economic strength lies largely in this complex web of small and medium enterprises, which are the cornerstone of our economic system. Today in Canada, 97.9% of firms have fewer than 100 employees. However, many of these companies are destined to disappear or be exchanged into foreign hands as their owners grow older and approach retirement. So they will be transferring the enterprise in the most profitable way, and so there are more people transferring firms than taking them up. We believe that this outcome is unacceptable, and we rather suggest that means of promoting the transfer of businesses to young entrepreneurs be put in place. For the past few years, our group has been advocating the introduction of a business ownership access program. In our view, this BOA program would allow a young entrepreneur to use the funds in his RSP to finance the purchase of a first business without incurring penalties or taxes. The entrepreneur would then be required to repay the amounts to his or her RSP funds over the next decade, ensuring he or she will not be penalized at the time of retirement. You know that there's the problem of credit, the problem of funding. That's the main problem for people who want to buy an enterprise. And the business ownership access program already exists. Purchasing a house is a safe investment. Buying a profitable business is even more so. So we think that a similar program should be put in place for purchasing a business. We think that we have to invest in youth. Our group believes that the main challenge that stems from the aging of the Canadian population is ensuring the intergenerational equity. Previous generations have enjoyed substantial benefits that are now unsustainable. The number of workers is decreasing. We think that it is impossible for the new generation of workers to enjoy the same benefits as the previous generations. We also believe that we must make sure not to pay the price. Therefore, we must continue the government's current efforts to return to a balanced budget as soon as possible, and we congratulate the government for the introduction of a plan that is bold and requires a lot of effort. But we do believe that this is important for the government to pursue its efforts in this direction. It's the right track. We also believe that we have to look further. Once the budget balance is restored, it will be important to prepare for the future by developing a plan to repay the national debt. Our group believes that the country's debt is a heavy weight to carry and undermines the economic development of Canada. 1 minute. Yes. Final focus, using all of our resources. Canada has long relied on its vast natural resources to act as an engine of economic development. While our group continues to promote the use of natural resources in accordance with the most stringent environmental standards, we also believe that we must put in place the necessary measures to diversify into new and important sectors of Canada's industry. We therefore favor a gradual shift towards a better developed knowledge-based economy. Investments in education are of the utmost importance, as are measures to promote partnerships between the private sector and our research institutions such as universities. So our group supports some of the recommendations in the Jenkins report. Going further, we believe that the greatest resource of Canada is its diverse pool of expert workers. Many of these young professionals say they feel like they are victims of discrimination. Our group therefore supports the implementation of measures to improve the immigration and integration process of foreign professionals. I will be prepared to answer any questions. Our next group is the Société de Transport de Montréal. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First of all, I would like to thank the committee members for allowing us to express our views in the context of the pre-budget consultations. I am Bernard Blanchet. I've been a member of the board for the last 10 years, and I'm in charge of two committees, the environment and infrastructure and operations. I'm going to put out the three recommendations that we are making to the federal government, that public transportation remain eligible for the infrastructure program, which will follow the Buildings Canada Fund, and that the sums be adequate to meet the needs. To pay all of the federal gas excise tax, 10 cents to the gas tax, to start without hesitating the next long-term Canadian infrastructure program. We are here as a public company that cares about the economic development of Montreal, Quebec, and Canada. The STM is a driver of prosperity and creation of wealth for the entire country, and it wants to be a key partner for the Canadian government. With more than 9,500 employees and a budget of $1.23 billion, the STM is the second largest carrier in Canada, the 14th largest firm in Quebec, and among the 70 most important employers, largest employers in Canada. In 2011, the STM achieved a traffic record of 405 million trips, an increase of 11.4% in 5 years, which dated back to 1949, this record. The STM set the objective of achieving 540 million trips by 2020. In addition to improving the provision of services, the maintenance of infrastructure is a particular challenge for the STM. We will give it priority. Pre-budget consultations are done in context of uncertainty worldwide. The Canadian government wants a return to balanced budgets. At the same time, it wants to support job creation, economic growth, and long-term prosperity. Concretely, this means that government spending must be reasonable, strategic, and targeted. These expenses must result in the maximum of economic spin-off, generate jobs, stimulate our productivity, and improve our competitiveness. The STM is a partner for achieving these goals. We believe that investing in public transport is the best way of meeting these objectives. The brief that we're submitting today is focused mainly on the economic recovery, the creation of jobs, and productivity. These are issues at the heart of the committee's concerns, and they were mentioned on the online questionnaire submitted to Canadians. First of all, the economic recovery. The Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, said last April that household debt was the main domestic risk facing the economy. The ratio of household debt is now 166% of the income. That's huge. By supporting public transport, the government can put money back into Canadians' pockets and help them reduce their spending. In 2010, Canadians spent on average $11,000 on transport, 21% of their income. That's huge, too. It's the second largest item of expenditure for households after housing, 28%. Of course, traveling by public transport is much less than traveling by car, 3 times less on average. Even for car owners, it is 40% cheaper to leave the car at home when that's possible. In short, we have to help Canadians to reduce their spending. The STM is a partner in achieving this objective. The second aspect is to create jobs. In a time of economic downturn, strategic investment in infrastructure will stimulate growth. That's what Canada is doing. As you know, Building Canada helped our economic performance, and we have to continue this through investment in infrastructure, public transport, and others. Why? Because Canada is one of the largest builders of buses, trains, and subways. In total, the Canadian industry of public transport supports about 80,000 direct jobs and indirect jobs throughout the country. In addition, the economic spin-offs are estimated at $11.5 billion. So last week, there was a report on congestion which reported that Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver and Calgary are among the most congested cities in North America. In Montreal, the cost of congestion roughly $3 billion, Toronto $6 billion at least. So we need funding that is earmarked for this and that is recurring. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for letting me address your committee today. I am Eileen Bush-Vishniak, the president of the University of Saskatchewan. As one of the medical doctoral research-intensive universities in Canada, the U of S is extremely interested in the strategic and financial impacts of the next federal budget. We were pleased with the strategic directions taken in 2012 and hope that the Government of Canada continues to recognize the importance of post-secondary education and research in advancing our country's innovation agenda. Our written submission contains a number of observations and recommendations, but today I wish to focus on three key recommendations, namely continued support for research and development, the funding of national science facilities for long-term, and the investment in means of addressing the educational gap for Canada's Aboriginal peoples. Canada's investments in R&D as a percentage of GDP are lower than the OECD average and much lower than countries such as Israel, Sweden, and the US. If Canada wishes to be internationally competitive, we should explore increasing R&D investments to levels well above the OECD average, and it is this that we recommend. University research attracts talent and has tremendous social and economic impacts. For example, U of S researchers at the Canadian Light Source are developing new drugs, new materials for energy storage, and new ways to diagnose and treat serious medical conditions such as cancer and heart disease. But Canada must also recognize that R&D investments made today do not bear fruit immediately. Instead, they lay the foundation for the new discoveries we make tomorrow. Canada's efforts to increase business investment in R&D and develop new industry partnerships are important, but these efforts must be coupled with investments in fundamental research. The U of S is very privileged to be the home to both the Canadian Light Source, Canada's only synchrotron facility, and Vito Intervac, an international vaccine center. These facilities enhance our capacity to innovate, create employment and wealth, and solve global issues that impact the most basic of human needs: water, energy, food, and health. But as you know, buildings do not innovate, people innovate. In order to grow our human infrastructure in Canada, we need to be able to attract and retain the best and the brightest scientists and thinkers from around the world. This brain gain will only occur if we can provide the necessary research environment and equipment to enable these researchers to do their work which frequently spans decades. This is why it is so important to ensure that national research facilities like CLS and Vito Intervac have stable long-term operational funding in place, and that is the nature of our recommendation. On Aboriginal challenges and opportunities, the measures outlined in Canada's Economic Action Plan 2012 to improve First Nations education will help to reduce the existing gap between Canadian Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. particularly in the K-12 system. But we need to find effective mechanisms that reach all Aboriginal people. At the U of S, we have the highest proportion of self-declared Aboriginal students of any medical doctoral institution in Canada, but we recognize that we need to do more to increase Aboriginal graduates, teachers, researchers, and organizational leaders. New approaches are being explored to enhance Aboriginal education and partnering. These efforts would go much faster with federal investment in such strategies. Investing in Aboriginal education and employment is not only a moral imperative, but it is a sound investment. Studies have shown that closing the education and labor market gap between Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals by 2026 would lead to cumulative benefits of $400.5 billion in additional output and $115 billion in avoided government expenditures over the period from 2001 to 2026. So in summary, Canada needs a national innovation strategy that supports human, physical, and technological capital through investments in advanced education, research, knowledge transfer, and business development. It also needs to optimize the sustainability of our national research facilities and strengthen the capacity for all Canadians to contribute to the economy. This is not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do, and now is the time to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I should have also said on behalf of the committee, congratulations on being named president of the University of Saskatchewan. Welcome to the committee. And we've certainly been to CLS Light Source and Vito, so we understand the work being done there. We're going to start members' questions with Ms. Nash for 5 minutes, please.
Welcome to all of the witnesses, and thank you for your presentations. And I'd like to ask everyone a question. I'm not going to get there, though. So let me start with Dr. Raza. On this side of the committee, we certainly agree with you about renewing the Canada Health Accord, and we see that as a priority for Canadians. We are concerned about growing inequality in this country and about the social and economic impact of that growing inequality, and I'd like to get your take on the impact, what do physicians see in terms of the impact of inequality and of rising poverty in terms of the demands on health care?
For the question, Ms. Nash. There's actually been quite a remarkable focus within the medical community on inequality and social inequality and its implications for health. The recent Canadian Medical Association meeting in Yellowknife, in fact, made this its theme. And physicians are speaking out more on how this social inequality can actually decrease patients' health outcomes and actually cost the healthcare system more money in the long term. So I would certainly agree that it's a key plays a key component in keeping Canadians healthy, and I would also add that it's with respect to inequality. I would also bring it back to access of health services as well. One of the things that we had mentioned in our brief is the impact of increased for-profit delivery on access to care, and in fact, deliverers who are delivering for-profit healthcare will only go where they can make money. It's difficult to make money in remote communities that serve Aboriginal communities, marginalized urban communities. It's also difficult to make money delivering complex chronic care or difficult emergency care. And all of these have implications for equity and for Canadians living at or below the poverty line.
I assume that reducing inequality would actually save our healthcare system money. And I don't have time to ask you a question about that, but I'm just making that assumption. I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Alward. Your comments made me think about the parliamentary budget officer when he was here at an earlier time, and he talked about the cuts to the public sector in this budget as a drag on our economy and a drag on economic growth, and that it would cost us more in the long term. And I've heard you talk about the numbers of public sector and private sector jobs that you're seeing cut. And I know Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winner, has talked about reducing government expenditure in times of a slowing economy actually works to slow the economy further. And so may work against our best interests in terms of job creation and keeping our economy moving well. But I want to ask you specifically about cuts to food inspection, because am I to understand correctly that none of these supposed 700 food inspectors that the government has told us they have hired, your members are not seeing them? Were any of these newly hired food inspectors at XL Foods?
Thank you for the question. Specifically in XL Foods, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, there's been no new inspectors put in slaughterhouses since 2006. So there's been no, as far as inspectors go. So we don't know where these inspectors are going. We do know that there were several of them that went to a program that's called Invasive Alien Species Program, which basically it works to keep harmful organisms out of Canada. So that's, not directly related to food safety at all. So in respect to where the 700 inspectors went, we don't know. We're certainly not seeing them.
No new inspectors hired since 2006, and now Canadians find themselves with the largest meat recall in Canadian history, and with people falling sick from E. coli.
I just want to specify that there was, in that particular program, which is called the Meat Hygiene Slaughter Program, there's been no new inspectors hired in that particular program, which is directly related to food safety.
Because it was a problem with hygiene that was the cause of the E. coli contamination. So do you, I draw the conclusion, I'm running out of time, but it just seems as though these cuts are in fact costing us more in terms of the outcomes. Do you agree with that?
For sure, and Canadians are agreeing with us from coast to coast to coast that these cuts are having a terrible detrimental effect on local economies. I had the privilege earlier this summer of being in St. Andrews, New Brunswick.
Unfortunately, we are over the members' time, so just briefly wrap up.
I agree. Canadians are telling us the same thing, especially in small-town Canada. Small-town Canada are being greatly affected by these cuts.
Thank you. Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to all the witnesses. It was very diverse presentations today, and so you can imagine the challenges that we have as a Finance Committee at the end of the day, really trying to come up with the right decisions in terms of moving forward in a positive way. I'm going to start my first question, Mr. Collier, because your recommendation was fairly succinct. I guess, first of all, there would probably be a cost to the change of classification. Have you done the analysis both to the cost, but also I would anticipate you would expect if this change was made, it would also increase competitiveness. So have you done any sort of scoping out of that particular issue in terms of both costs and ultimately how it would or would not support increased competitiveness and volume?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of comments I would make in response to that question. The first is that investment in these LNG facilities will, over the longer term, deliver significant economic benefit. We've included in our submission, based on 5 BCF a day, which is a reasonable estimate, I think, of what might come forward in BC, $500 billion in GDP, 3 million person-years of employment, $150 billion in taxes and royalties if we look back upstream as well. So some very significant economic impacts. There is no question that there is a competitiveness dimension of this. I mentioned how the tax treatment in Canada differs from that in the countries with whom we're competing, Australia in particular. On any particular project, there would definitely be an accelerated near-term write-down, tax write-off, relative to, if you compare the 30% to the 8% declining balance. I think in the fullness of time, that's de minimis relative to the overall economic benefit that would come forward.
Another probably complex question with hopefully a fairly quick answer, because I do want to ask Dr. Raza a question after, is you really talked about a private sector driven recovery, and our government agrees with you in terms of the private sector having to to move things forward, we have created in our budget some modest reductions, 5 to 10%. And so can you maybe, as you listen to other people in terms of how the government chooses to spend its money and how we actually create the revenue to fund all the programs that we dearly want to have, whether it be, healthcare or education, can you give your quick insight in that area? Complex quick question, and then hopefully I'll have time for Dr.
I'll give you a very
Raza.
quick answer. The oil and gas sector creates huge revenue streams and huge revenue streams to government in Canada, both provincially and federally. That allows government to fund numerous programs, be they healthcare, education, or otherwise. So I think by creating a competitive environment, a competitive tax environment that attracts investment to Canada, there will be significant generation of revenue that allows funding of other programs.
Great, thank you. Still some time?
You've got nearly 2 minutes. Yeah.
Perfect. So Dr. Raza, we're quite proud of the fact that as we're moving through this challenging times that we've made commitments in terms of increased transfers to the provinces, 6%, of course, to 2016-17, and then 3% after that. So it's one area that we really have protected as a federal government in terms of moving forward with the healthcare transfers. Where I really would like to focus my questions and comments is I absolutely agree. Innovation provides a huge opportunity. So the first question would be, is the different projects that you were talking about, were they funded through Health Infoway Canada or were they funded provincially? I guess, that would be my first question. And my second question is, you did talk about the federal government role, and the Canadian Nurses Association came forward and they suggested that we select 5 health and system indicators and that we set up sort of this collaborative work as a sort of pan-Canadian with the professionals, with the provinces, with creating those 5 indicators.
30 seconds, so if you want him to respond.
So maybe go with the last one first. Would you support that idea in terms of, would that be something that we could do?
A brief response, please.
I think that's a great idea. One of the very exciting things that's happening in healthcare is interprofessional care. So nurse practitioners are taking a more active role in providing patient care. Pharmacists are administering vaccines in Ontario. There's all these sorts of ways where we can understands each other's scope of practice and, in fact, improve care while maintaining or reducing costs. So something like that sounds like a strategy along the same lines, and that's something that I think is certainly worth the effort.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Mr. Bryson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start off with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And first question, with shale gas opportunities across Canada, does a progressive policy around shale gas and represent an opportunity to geographically diversify petro wealth in Canada from typically today we're associated with fairly small geography, and as we're talking about, Ms. Nash spoke about issues of equality. Well, one of the things is equality of economic opportunity, and does the shale gas opportunity potentially give us that capacity?
I think the short answer is yes. I would make a couple of observations. The first is that a healthy gas market that works for both producers and consumers is what we need. That will attract investment, and that will attract investment across the country in areas where there is the shale gas opportunity. And our view is that at the moment, given the abundance of shale gas in terms of supply and the oversupply relative to the markets, that enhanced market development, be that through conversion of coal-fired generation in the U.S., be that through other market initiatives in Canada, or be it through LNG exports, is going to make for a healthier natural gas market in Canada that will benefit both consumers and producers and allow more diversity in supply development.
Some shale gas in the U.S. is contributing to the eventual U.S. recovery in 2 ways. One is cheaper energy, which is good for the economy broadly, but also the creation of jobs associated with it. So I think that's something we have to watch and be aware of in Canada. On the healthcare side, and appreciate, Doctor, your intervention, and you're saying that you'd hope that the government move quickly on the 2014 healthcare accord. And I'd say it's very late in the game because it took, the leading up to the 2004 healthcare Accord, it took a lot of negotiation with the provincial governments, a lot of consultation, a lot of work. And I was speaking with the provincial finance minister earlier today, who expressed to me that there's very little dialogue going on currently. And he actually expressed that in the government's unilateral decision to reduce the growth of transfers to the province for health care, that in fact the government lost an opportunity to leverage on that discussion in order to demand greater accountability. Do you see that as the federal government actually pulling back from its traditional role, both in terms of not just funding, but also in terms of accountability?
I don't know if I'm able to comment on its traditional role, but I certainly agree that the federal government's role should not be limited to just writing checks to provinces. There's an important role for setting national standards. We are a bit late in the game, perhaps, but I certainly would encourage the federal government to reach out to provinces. It's something that provincial premiers were asking for when they met in Halifax not too long ago. Some provinces are starting to discuss bulk buying agreements for pharmaceuticals to reduce costs. And in fact, the health minister has indicated interest to do it for the areas of health care that the federal government is directly responsible for, Aboriginal health and the Canadian Forces. So there are some areas for overlap, and we would encourage this committee to consider those when they develop the recommendations and take them to the Minister of Finance and when they have conversations with the Minister of Health.
Mr. Elward, the recovery in Canada, or what recovery we're seeing, is pretty uneven. A lot of it is based in provinces with natural resource wealth. Saskatchewan, Alberta are showing more robust growth than, for instance, the Maritimes. The cuts to the public service and to the public service jobs, do you see that as contributing to the growing inequality in the regions? Because if you effectively, those represent a bit of an, if you will, an equalization of opportunity in good, well-paying jobs in the regions. Is there a risk that a lot of those cuts will be felt more strongly in the region without Ottawa being cut as much? It will be actually the regions that really need those jobs?
Okay, but if we want our witnesses to answer, we do need to give them some time. So, Mr. Albert, you have about 20 seconds for that.
Thank you, Mr. Royston, for the question. For sure. I mean, small-town Canada is being hit tremendously hard by these cuts. When you take federal jobs out of communities like Montague, Prince Edward Island, St. Andrews, New Brunswick, it has, as I said, a devastating effect on those local economies because there's a trickle-down effect. You know, the coffee shop owners are going to be out of business within months when you take federal jobs out of communities like that. Store owners, service workers are going to be out of work due to these federal cuts. So there's a tremendous trickle-down effect, as I said, especially in small-town Canada.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here this afternoon. Chair, I'm going to maybe just straighten the record out on some information, some misinformation that was here, and then I'll go to questions of the University of Saskatchewan, because that's a very important facility in the province of Saskatchewan. They do great work. You know, I'm very disappointed that the NDP and their union bosses keep proceeding with this fear and smear campaign in the red meat sector. You know, they've spread off information here today that's not true. In fact, I'll straighten out the record right now, and I hope anybody listening to these meetings will listen to what I have to say. You know, 170 of the 700 new inspectors are in the meat program. None of the cuts affected to CFA were frontline food safety inspectors. In Establishment 38, the one in question, there are 40 inspectors and 6 vets. That's a 20% increase since 2006. If you want the facts, and I tell the NDP to do this, go to www.inspection.gc.ca. It's there, it's transparent, it's right there, you can see it. So, you know, I just find it really frustrating that they try to use fear of the food system to create a political advantage, which is surely disappointing. But I guess I'm going to go to something more positive, and that's the University of Saskatchewan, because that's a positive school. And I think you'd understand why I do that.
Can I respond to that, please?
But members' time. So
it's my time. I can move on, just like I give you your time.
Will I get an opportunity to respond to that?
It's up to them.
It's up to the member's time how the member wants to use their 5 minutes. So.
You talked about attracting the brightest and the best. What can we do for programs to attract the brightest and the best from around the world? What we're doing now, is there things that we need to change in the program that we existingly have? And Just any ideas that you'd have there that would be positive.
Yes, in fact, that was the nature of the two of the recommendations I was trying to make. To attract the best and the brightest, we not only need the best facilities, but we need to know that those facilities have the operating funds to continue and funds to improve as technology improves. So that's where we need to be, not that we build a building once and then expect everyone else to maintain it and never provide any funding for upgrading equipment or maintaining the operations.
Is there more that we can be doing outside of, we've got first-class facilities at the University of Saskatchewan, we've got a great community to live in, we've got a great environment to raise a family. Is there something we should do in the tax structure or in the promotion abroad of that would attract these bright people?
Yeah, I will not speak about the tax issue because I'm simply not qualified. But there is much we can be doing to make ourselves more visible nationally and internationally. One of the things that Canada has not done is the creation of a federal science policy. And if we had a federal science strategy, which included what we were going to fund, how we were going to do it, and how we would make sure we were using all the facilities effectively and efficiently and attracting the best and the brightest to Canada, then that would really have a dramatic impact on what all of the research-intensive universities are doing.
About Aboriginal students, and I know in the riding of Prince Albert we have a fair number of Aboriginal students coming into Prince Albert to start their first and second year of post-secondary education, whether it's university or trade school. One of the things is transition and the extra support they need at the start. What type of things are you doing at the University of Saskatchewan to provide that support?
Yeah. You're absolutely right that our Aboriginal students at the University of Saskatchewan find they have the hardest time not with their preparation for university academically, but with the cultural dissonance they encounter when they suddenly arrive on a campus which is no longer majority Aboriginal population. So what we are doing is not only providing services that ease that transition, we find what works best is that we are working with families rather than working just with students. We are introducing students who arrive to Aboriginal communities in and around our campuses. And the other thing that we are doing, we are in the very early stages of talking about creating residence facilities for families rather than simply for students. And that will have a disproportionately big impact on our Aboriginal students who come to campus.
Quick question. In The Economist on October 6th, there was a comment by Mark Carney about dead money in the business community. Is the University of Saskatchewan doing anything with the business community to attract some of that dead money out in investments into research and development?
Absolutely. The University of Saskatchewan has, we in fact rank number 2 in the country in terms of the money, the revenue that we generate through our patents and intellectual property. That's because we have traditionally had a very strong relationship with the business community. We intend to continue to do that, and we have been beneficiaries of a wonderful relationship, some of it philanthropic.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoback, Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Caron, please.
Meat inspectors that were hired. Out of them, 170 were meat inspectors, none of them in slaughterhouses. They were in processing plants. Excel Foods is a slaughterhouse. It's also a fact, as reported by Sarah Schmidt in the Postmedia, from Postmedia in April, that in April there were 59 meat inspectors that were cut following the budget, with 800 staff at CFIA that actually received notice that their position was in danger. There was no way of knowing which jobs. She asked repeatedly, and the ministry, the department would never give her an answer. Mr. Elward, could you actually confirm what I'm saying?
Yes. Exactly, and the issue is the slaughterhouse issue. That's the problem. For months now, the Public Service Alliance of Canada has been telling Canadians that our food safety is at risk. This government said we were misleading Canadians. It's obvious now the Public Service Alliance of Canada were not the ones misleading Canadians.
Thank you. Another silly game, I'm sorry to bring in that kind of silly game that we're playing since we came back from this summer. But my next question will be to Mr. Collier. You know, there's the issue about carbon is that you can actually use carbon pricing, or you can use regulation to address climate change. There are three ways actually to address climate change. One is carbon tax, one is cap and trade, and one is the regulatory approach. Liberals have favored carbon tax. We have favored a cap and trade market system. Conservatives have chosen the regulatory approach, which is actually fairly expensive. Canadian Press and Maclean's actually reported that their approach so far is probably costing consumers close to $16 billion so far. Can you confirm that the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers are actually on the record supporting carbon pricing as opposed to the regulatory approach?
Let me just make a couple of comments. First, I think, is to always keep in mind that action matters, and there's a lot of work being done in industry, in our industry, to reduce carbon emissions, and the use of natural gas, broader use of natural gas, I think, is an opportunity to do that. Second, there's a variety of mechanisms by which one can implement carbon policy. You've touched on all of them. There's no strong consensus among our membership as to which of those is the best. They can all be applied, and I think the issue is how they're applied, and there's no ideal mechanism. And we've been working with the government to proceed with carbon management and a policy framework for the oil and gas sector. We'll continue to do that, and I think it's important that we move forward with policy, but more importantly that we move forward with action.
I was actually just referring to Sean McCarthy article in Globe and Mail, which actually stated, and I'll quote, individual business groups from the Canadian Council of Chief Executives to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers have urged Ottawa to move forward with a market-based system that would create certainty for companies that have to make long-term investment decisions. And that was as opposed to the regulatory approach.
Yeah, I think there's been various representations by various groups in the past about which form of carbon policy is preferred. I think it's also fair to say that the current government is moving down the regulatory path, and we're working with them to try and find something that works for the oil and gas sector.
There's no way of knowing this, because honestly, I'm seeing Sustainable Prosperity, which is also a group that tracks the various groups' positions, and they also say that you're in favor of carbon pricing as opposed to the regulatory approach. So there must have been some declarations, some statements made by your association to that effect.
Yeah, as I said, we have said in the past that, and I think if you looked at our membership today, broadly a market-based system of some kind over the longer term is something that our members would prefer. But we've also been very clear that we want to work with the government to put something in place in the near term.
I understand. Thank you. Monsieur Dubreuil, je me sens mal un peu pour Monsieur Dubreuil, Monsieur Blanchette.
Mr. Dubreuil, Mr. Blanchette. I wanted to ask a question, Mr. Dubreuil. This idea of having something like an RSP to get a business underway was a good idea. It's nice to buy a profitable business, but there are a lot of small businesses that aren't that profitable, where that rather high failure rate. So it's rather risky. So what would happen in the case where you use an RSP to buy a business that goes bankrupt and then you couldn't pay back the RSP? Well, I think there's always a way of paying back the RSP. That's why we're giving a fairly long timeline to pay back the amount. So if, for whatever reason, the firm goes under, then the person has the time to change gears. That's why we want to give a fairly long timeline. But the basic principle is to say this: yes, in any investment, in any expenditure, there may be some good ones and there may be some bad ones. But this BOA would allow a person to buy a business with their RSPs. But that doesn't mean that 2 weeks later there wouldn't be some plant that would establish itself close by, and that would cause the business to go into bankruptcy.
Please. Thank you, Chair. Witnesses, I want to thank you all for being here today and making representation before our Finance Committee. I do have some questions for a couple of the witnesses. And, Chair, if you could let me know when I have roughly 1 minute left, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin with Mr. Collier. We have an overabundance
of liquid natural gas, and natural gas for that matter. Huge opportunity. We have the window right now to really take advantage of this opportunity that we have. We currently don't have an export facility to export liquid natural gas. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. The Americans have one south of the 49th parallel, correct? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. We need to build those export facilities in order to take advantage of the low price of liquid natural gas so we can export to developing markets. Do you have a plan in place that you could talk about that could tell us about how we can create these export facilities, particularly, I guess, on the West Coast, and the kind of jobs that would create and how benefit it would be to the economy?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, yes, it is extremely important that we develop these facilities for the Canadian economy as a whole, I would argue. I think from a policy standpoint, there's several things the government has done and that have been helpful. I think the review of the regulatory process has been helpful. Some of the work that's been done with respect to workforce, temporary foreign workers, has been helpful. A number of initiatives that I think are foreign trade missions, numerous visits to China, Korea, and Japan to promote Canadian products have been helpful. I think the fiscal piece is the one dimension that would be very helpful in the near term and would put us on a much better competitive footing relative to the people we're competing against, and would also, as I said earlier, treat these facilities in a manner comparable to those of other processing facilities in Canada. So the government can be helpful. At the end of the day, these are private sector investments that need to be moved forward. The job of government, I think, is to create the fiscal environment that attracts investment and allows us to proceed.
Yeah, and we've been fairly successful at doing that. In addition, the manufacturing base, manufacturers are certainly in favor of a lower price for natural gas. The exporters are in favor of a higher price for natural gas. Do you see these two conflicting at some point, or?
The market has to work for buyers and sellers, yes. I think is a simple answer. But a couple of points I'd like to make. One is just further to Mr. Bryson's comments earlier. This is good in terms of the development of natural gas. It's also good in terms of the use of natural gas as a fuel and making industry more competitive across the country, in fact, across North America. So it will benefit the economy in both ways and create significant jobs and economic growth. And again, I come back to the point that it would be helpful, extremely helpful, if the government were to make this fiscal change, which is effectively a reclassification to treat these facilities comparable to others that are doing similar things.
Okay. And how am I doing for time, Chair?
You have 1 minute, 20 seconds.
Thank you. So in terms of skilled labor, you're facing a shortage, are you not?
Yes, we are.
Currently? Yeah. Okay. I assume I have a minute left now, Mr. Chair?
Minute 5.
Minute 5. Well, by the time I finish...
I'm going to do 5-second countdown.
There we go. I have a question for Mr. Aylward. I'm just looking at your constitution right now of the Public Service Alliance of Canada, and it says that your objects are to unite all workers in a single democratic organization, to obtain for all workers the best standards of compensation and other conditions of employment, and to protect the rights and interests of all workers. Terrific. To maintain and defend the right to strike. All wonderful objectives and consistent with the objectives of a union. However, I'm also looking at your website, and I'm seeing under the media section that you've issued a number of statements criticizing Israel for defending itself, for rocket attacks into the southern part of Israel. How is that consistent? How is that consistent with defending the right to strike and creating a democratic organization in public service like
Point of order.
Point of order. Ms. Nash, please.
Well, I'm just, with respect, I'm wondering what foreign policy and foreign affairs has to do with our finance discussion.
It's a matter of debate.
To me, it seems we're in pre-budget hearings, and I'm wondering should we bring in our foreign affairs critics here?
Well, as members of this committee know, I am very flexible, as all speakers in the House are with respect to relevance. Pre-budget consultations are very broad. So the question has been asked. I think we should allow Mr. Aylward an opportunity to respond to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, although I thought I was going to be addressing questions concerning how these cuts are affecting Canadians. Unfortunately, that wasn't the question. First of all, I'm not a union boss. I'm not.
Okay.
Can I answer the question?
Yeah. Mr. Aylward, you have the floor, please.
First of all, I'm not a union boss. I'm a vice president, a national vice president of my union. I was elected the same as all of you were, first of all. We believe in social justice everywhere.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Mai, s'il vous plaît. Oh, Mr. Marston, please, sorry.
Well, I just heard Mr. Hoback use the term, it's embarrassing. Yes, it is embarrassing as far as I'm concerned. It's troubling. I mean, all of us have personal opinions about people, maybe even who wind up being our witnesses here. But when witnesses come before us, these labor leaders are duly elected through the processes of the union movement, which is guaranteed by our charter. And to have them come before a parliamentary committee like this to be insulted, that's embarrassing. And as just pointed out, they're elected by the same people who elect us. So why in the world do we have to get into insulting them is beyond me.
Point of order, is it Mr. Hoback or Mr. Evans?
And just like us, if they are elected, they can be criticized and challenged, just like the voters will challenge us.
Okay, that's actually a point of debate. That's not a point of order. Mr. Marston, continue, please.
Well, I just want to say, yes, they can be challenged, but they can be challenged in a more dignified way than what I've been seeing here. Anyway, Mr. Alward, I don't want to eat up the time.
Mr. Marston, point of order, Mr. Adler.
Mr. Marston said that these are personal opinions. These are on the Public Service Alliance of Canada website. And these were...
Order. Is this a point of order or is this a point of debate?
Debate.
I prefer a point of order, but...
You're
asking me the question? It's a point of order.
What I'm hearing is a point of debate, not a point of order. And I just... when a member has the floor, let's not have comments from the other side of the table, from either side. So let's just... Mr. Marston has the floor. Let's let him have his question.
Well, I'd like to turn to our witness. Since we've drawn the attention to Mr. Alward again, we'll go a little bit further. It's my understanding, that the 2012 budget already slashed 10%. There's concerns about how that's affected air safety. There's concerns how the self-management system, we've raised that in the House, is affecting things. Transport Canada apparently is changing the way that it monitors air carriers and their compliance, and to the point where we're understanding that at least 11 or so of the inspectors are fearing the loss of their job. Would you like to expand on that, sir?
Mr. President, what I would like to do, actually, because I don't have the information at my fingertips, and to make sure that we get it right for the committee members, I will ask our people who actually represent those members to provide the committee members with that answer in writing for the record, if that's okay.
That would certainly be appreciated, because if those cuts are going that deep, I think it's important for us to know that as a committee. I guess the same can be said for fisheries and oceans. We're hearing, that BC have lost a lot of their inspection capacity, that the offices, the habitat offices in Prince George and Smithers have been cut back. And when you consider that that's the area where there's discussions about a potential pipeline and the impact on those habitats, it would seem to me that it would be all that and more important to have inspectors there. And again, would that be an area you'd like to expand or perhaps supply more information to us?
Just let me say this. The cuts to fisheries and oceans in British Columbia in 2012 have left the department with half the habitat staff it had a decade ago. Among the fisheries habitat offices closing and those in Prince George and Smithers, they have taken the lead in assessing the Northern Gateway pipeline's impact on fish habitats. So the government says that signs will guide decisions about the pipeline, but is cutting the programs that will actually provide the signs.
How's my time, Mr. Chair?
You have just under 2 minutes.
Okay. Another program then, perhaps the Prairie Shelter Program, Shelter Belt. My understanding, again, from some notes I've made here, that That's been in effect since 1901 and has been producing, distributing tree seedlings for planting on agricultural land in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Peace River in BC, and has provided over 650 million seedlings to more than 700,000 farmers since its inception, and still sends out more than 3 million trees a year. You might be surprised, but the reason this struck me is I planted trees, feels like 100 years ago, when I was young, and that reforestation is so important across our country. And so, again, it's soil erosion and the damage that can be done. Do you have more information on that than what I've been able to glean?
Just in respect to that specific issue, the conservation approach costs very little and protects crops from wind and reduces soil erosion and soil moisture evaporation. So again, the cuts to this particular program will have, a devastating effect. And again, it just makes no sense to us as to why this program is being cut.
Thank you.
Thank you.
30 seconds, I wouldn't get far enough.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming before us. And Mr. Dubreuil, did I have that right? Astounding. Some of these things that you talked about. I don't know if anybody else was thinking the same thing when you give us these statistics. Just over 1 million businesses have under 100,000 employees, and almost 98% are under 100 employees. That's incredible. That's incredible because our unemployment rate is about just over 7%, but it constitutes about 1.4 million people. So, in essence, if we can get it right, some of the things you talked about, we have the capability of if we just had one more hiree in every one of those businesses, we could wipe out our unemployment rate.
That's certainly one way to look at it, for sure.
And that's something that I know that I've mentioned as well too. And when we speak to people about wanting those big factors, it really is the small business that is the main engine and the main driver. I wonder if you could tell us why, and you've mentioned, you've spoken about the importance of free trade and free trade agreements, the importance of that, and why that's so fundamental in building businesses and achieving that goal.
Well, there's no doubt that developing new export and import even markets is of the utmost importance for the development of that network of small and medium-sized businesses. What I believe is the most important is to conserve and to build on that network because when one piece falls, it certainly will affect 2, 3, 5, 10 people in a community. It will not affect a whole community or a whole small town where there is a factory where everyone is employed. So I think that's the importance.
Now, training is fundamental. And we had a witness with us last week from post-education, and I appreciate what Ms. Bush-Vishnik was saying as well, too, the fact that we need a strategy. Can you give us some ideas of how we can be more successful and effective in post-secondary education for the jobs of tomorrow? Have you got some ideas? And then I'm going to just switch that question over to you because I got just a small segment I want to add to that, too. If you could just please, sir.
There's no doubt that the University of Saskatchewan is a great example of what's going on and what has to be done right, in the sense that we strongly believe that universities and private businesses have to work hand in hand to be able to develop new technologies which are going to benefit everyone.
And would universities would they agree to the suggestion that possibly government say, listen, we need some change in your course here because we see Mr. Jean will tell you, for instance, he usually does, and I'm sure he's going to tell you today too, how many people are needed in his writing and how many in the extraction sector. But are you I guess are you keen on that maybe interference on the part of government if that were to happen?
We are very keen to interact with businesses because we know that our students, when they graduate, wish to be employed. So we have traditionally and will continue to work very closely with businesses, in fact, particularly right now in the extractive industries. We do think it's important, however, to recognize that as a university we do not exist to replace the training that must exist within businesses so that students can be certified on specialized equipment.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchett, you properly pointed out how important the transit industry is in your writing, and we all know how many areas are affected by that employment. Can you talk to us a little bit about the public-private partnerships in the Greater Montreal? Because I understand that there's a construction maintenance center for commuter trains in Lachine. Can you talk to us about that and how effective it is?
Yes, well, like we say, it was done in tender, but it was done with Alstom, and we work with a group of engineers. So we work as three groups together. So we have our own employees, and there we have the engineers from outside, the firms outside, plus the suppliers. So the three together. We do the same thing for our new system, which is called right-on-time system, which is called iBus. It's the same thing. So we went to hire people who knows the technology, and now we're bringing in our system, and we put the people together. So when they leave, so we know how to work, how to run, and how to achieve the assets afterwards that we could do it in-house afterwards. So that's the way we're doing it. So we go and get the important outside, and after that we bring it inside. And we're working a lot with university, for working, for doing some thing with our employees.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to carry on with what Mr. Van Kesteren was saying. How important it is that in my writing that for small businesses, we have a lot of small businesses in Brossard. So we want to go from 11% to 9% rather than to go toward the large companies. We know now, and my colleagues mentioned, it leads to dead money that's not reinvested in the economy. And that means that today, well, yes, we have problems, particularly when we look at young people. Could you talk about the fact that the rate of unemployment among young people is twice as high as the unemployment rate for others? What can we do to improve that? Answer. There's no doubt that this is a great problem throughout the country, that young people are having a harder and harder time to find a job. That's why we would like to set up measures to promote entrepreneurship rather than waiting for people to find a job, to create their own, to be part of the network of SMEs, or to join with a few other people and do something when someone is closing down rather than transferring the business to a foreign concern. That would be very positive. What about the idea of reducing the taxation rate of small businesses? Do you think that would be helpful? Yes, I think that would be helpful. Would it leave a little bit more room so that these businesses can breathe better? It doesn't eliminate the problem altogether. It's a crying problem. Entrepreneurs who are retiring, who are going to be closing down their firms, whatever the taxation rate may be. Mr. Blanchett, what we suggested, my colleague Olivia Chow put forward a bill which was a national plan for public transit. We want to make sure that there's stable, long-term funding rather than having it on a case-by-case basis per project. Do you think that that is something that the government could do? We know that the government didn't support it, but is it something you would suggest, that there be a national plan to invest in transit, which would create jobs? Obviously, the 22 mayors and cities that came together under the mayor of Montreal did put this forward. And there was a number of partnerships with the FCM, the Canadian Urban Transit Association. So that's exactly what we said. So together we can do something. However we go about it, we can do something. But there's increasing cohesiveness to work toward a single objective. We've done our homework. Everyone's got a business plan. Everyone's got a strategic plan. We know what our assets are. We know exactly what we need, and we know what we need in each city and province in the country. We know how to deliver the goods, because when the service is there, people are going to use it, and that's exactly what's happening at the moment. rather than proceeding with the policy, the important thing is to work together. And I think that all the parties have seen that everybody was pushing in the same direction. Question? Dr. Raza.
I mean, the government is really proud to have cut refugee health care, and we've seen the member from Saskatchewan who really came out like really proud of that action. Is it something that you support in terms of cutting? And again, that means downloading the problem to provinces, because we know that provinces will be picking up the tab at the end. Can you maybe comment on that, and maybe Ms. Irene also?
So what we're being told is that the cuts are to equalize the delivery of health care for refugees as for other Canadians. But the reality is, across provinces, most Canadians on social assistance had the same level of benefits as refugees did before the cuts. Now that the cuts have happened, we're getting stories across the country about how refugees are being denied care. There's been mixed messages from Citizenship and Immigration Canada, which has resulted in a lot of confusion amongst health providers as to exactly what is covered. So, in fact, even after the cuts, some refugees who would be covered are being denied services because health providers just don't know what to do. It's a significant problem. We pride ourselves on a country that is welcoming to newcomers, is a refuge in stormy times overseas, and delivers healthcare equitably. And unfortunately, that's not happening for refugees coming to Canada.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for attending today. I do want to spend most of my time with CAP. I think, being that it does lead the country in jobs, 500,000 Canadians are employed directly or indirectly, and in fact, you see that number raising to possibly up to 110 to 130,000 in the next 7 years. So it's a very important part of our economy. And I just want to, first of all, compliment CAP for taking the lead in something that happened this summer. And that is in Fort McMurray, we had a fundraiser, and CAP came to lead that fundraiser to send over $1 million in medicines to the third world, and I want to congratulate you for that. And both Syncrude and Suncor, it was amazing to see the come together of the community, oil resources in particular, and send that money overseas in the way of medicines. And I know my colleagues appreciated it, as did my constituents, being part of that. I do want to ask you, just hypothetically, if on page 4 of the NDP's platform, there was an advocation of a carbon tax that would be an additional tax of $21 billion for fossil fuels, in essence, and to raise that $21 billion from companies, oil sands producers in particular, who would ultimately pay that increase of taxation?
Well, I think ultimately the consumer pays.
And that's why I want to ask you the next question, because consumers ultimately pay the price of fuel, and I want to talk about how we can get lower fuel prices for Canadians. And I think there's only two ways to do that: short-term in regulation and control a competitive environment, which ultimately doesn't work, and we've seen that in many countries around the world, or to increase and grow the economy of the particular country that's producing it, and indeed have a better quality of life with more disposable income, so it's less of an impact. Is that fair to say? Those are the only two ways. You either control it through regulation, or you grow the economy and have a robust economy.
Well, it won't surprise you to hear us say that we believe the market works, competitiveness matters, and the other thing that matters a lot is technology and innovation.
And in fact, the only two threats that I see in relation to growing our economy is the chronic workers shortage we have, the skilled worker shortage that we have, and you've identified that in your recommendations to us, and also pipeline capacity and the constraints of pipeline capacity and distribution. And you've indicated to us, and I think that it's no surprise that I would recommend as one of my top 5 recommendations what you've suggested here, to change the classification of that LNG to be able to boost the economy and boost productivity and ultimately our economy. That's what your goal is it not?
Our goal is to really do two things: make sure we've got a competitive investment climate, attract investment, allow us to invest and grow the economy, and that's going to create jobs, and it's going to create revenue for governments that can then be used, as the point was made earlier, to fund healthcare, education, various other services.
And in fact, right now we actually sell our oil between 20 and a 40% discount to the United States because that's our only customer, not for 99% of that. Isn't that fair to say?
I think the driver there's an issue on the oil side and on the gas side with respect to us not being attached to international markets, and in doing so, there's a discount on both products at the moment.
So if we don't expand our distribution channels, we're going to constrain our marketplace, and we won't have those 130,000 jobs that we're counting on for in the oil sands, for instance.
We won't grow, we won't create revenue, we won't create jobs, and we won't be able to fund the kinds of things the revenue from our industry funds today.
So are you suggesting that this is the largest threat that our economy faces? Because it seems to me, based upon the amount of jobs we produce, and the economy is an 8% generator just in the oil sands itself, this constraint is not only restricting the amount of funds we get today in the neighborhood of, I think, between $2 and $4 billion a year because of the discount we give to the United States, but it also is going to threaten our economy in the future.
Market access is the biggest single issue in front of us today.
All right. Now, I was very curious in relation to some other things that you suggested. Now, the reason why is I'm from Fort McMurray, and as Mr. Van Kesteren told you, I clearly am concerned with employment, and I represent more unions, I think, than any other person in this place as well. I would mention that, being from Fort McMurray. But the largest threat that I hear from all of my retailers, my industry people, is mobility of workforce and workforce generally. Why did you not pick that as your number one issue?
I guess the short answer is back to my previous answer. We think market access is the biggest single issue facing the industry at the moment. The workforce issue is a significant challenge. It's not an issue easily addressed. It's going to take a multifaceted response. I think the government, as I said earlier, has done some good things on the immigration front. We have to provide jobs for Canadian workers as well. So training and development, workforce mobility, underrepresented groups in the workforce all have to be part of the answer.
Okay. Thank you.
It is.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
extremely important.
Thank you. Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses as well. I'm going to try to do this as quick as possible. I want to start with Dr. Raza. Thank you very much, by the way, for the service that you provide to the community. We do think it's very important, and we stand by our attempts to try to rectify the situation. St. Boniface Hospital Research Center and St. Boniface Hospital were here a couple of weeks ago, and we're pointing out just the ineffectiveness of the healthcare system. In fact, in their document, they say that 70% of a nurse's time is actually spent looking for the tools and the equipment and the things that they need to do their job, which obviously is costly. And so they've got a system called the lean system that they've copied from an automotive industry sector that is geared to reduce costs and that kind of thing. And so, again, the government is trying to find ways so that we can provide the health care that Canadians need in an effective manner. But, of course, hospitals and the provinces have to do their part to try to find those. We are trying to do something about paying for it. But the reality of it is that when GDP is only growing by, 2 plus, 2 and a little bit, 6% increases are not going to last forever. And we certainly don't want to see the country fall into a situation where we cannot afford the basics that we have. So I just want to point that out, and I encourage you to speak with St. Boniface Hospital about that, because I'd love to hear from you after this as to whether or not you might support something like that. Now, having said that, I do want to turn to Monsieur Dubreuil to ask you about some things that were mentioned. And I don't want to be partisan here, but when we look at the platforms and we look at the different suggestions made by the parties, we do the same thing amongst politicians as we do when we hear from witnesses. We compare them, right? You can't just pluck one thing out of a platform and say, hey, if we reduce small business acts, do you think that would help? Let's not forget the NDP also wants to double CPP. They want a 45-day work year that would cost EI premiums to go up. They want to increase all the corporate taxes back to at least 19%, if not more. They have a $21.5 billion carbon tax that, again, would be paid for, as Mr. Collier said, by consumers. So when you look at the whole of all of that, do you think those things are good for small business? When you look at the whole of it and not just pluck one thing out of a platform, or do you think balancing the budgets, making sure we pay down debt, providing hiring credits for small businesses to proceed with creating jobs is the better way to go. And I know I don't want to put you in a position where you pick one party over the other, but now that you know the story, and it's filled in the blanks a little bit, do you still agree with that whole story and decreasing to 9%, along with all the doubling and the tripling of everything else? Do you agree with it or not? It's a simple question.
I think it's a simple question.
Or
but
do
not necessarily a
you
simple
agree with it
answer.
as presented?
I think it's my turn.
Order.
As I was saying, I think it's a simple question. I'm not entirely sure it's a simple answer. I think some of what you're mentioning will certainly hurt a certain type of business, might help some other types. It's very, very hard to say. The situation we are faced with and what we're looking at right now are problems with entrepreneurship, is the fact that there is a very high unemployment rate. People cannot find jobs, and we would like them. And businesses are just businesses are going under because their owners are either shutting them down or selling them, or there's a lot of consequences to that type of thing, and that's the question that we really want that to be addressed.
Big Brothers was here just the other day. They also made a suggestion about a mentorship program, putting students into positions with businesses to try to teach them different things. And again, I would suggest you might want to speak with them, because it sounds like you have a common interest in that. 1 minute. Alors, Monsieur Blanchet.
So, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Blanchette. On page 3, you talked about the contribution from the government to public transit that demonstrate that the federal government did not contribute to public transit over 10 years ago. Today, the contribution reaches $1 billion per year through different programs, through different infrastructure programs. So that clearly shows that since the Conservative government has been in place, that we've invested a lot of money in that. But the other thing that's missing is that it's really a provincial issue. And since the Conservatives have been here, we've given 43% on average to all provinces. What do you have to say about that? Yes. It's clear, that Canada has different results regarding agreements with provinces. What we're doing here today is we're saying, yes, there are substantive efforts that have been made. It's important. We have to maintain that. You're preparing the next Building Canada for 2014. So we want recurrent earmarked investments, and that's important to us. And after that, well, of course, we have work that needs to be done with the provinces. I was saying that earlier. Nationally, we need to adjust based on the provinces. But for us, with the Green Plan in Quebec, it went very well. In Ottawa, 77% more.
Merci, Madame Glover. Merci. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here, responding to our questions. We appreciate that very much, your interesting discussion. Colleagues, we will suspend for 2 minutes and bring the next panel forward. Thank you. I call this meeting back to order. I would ask all witnesses to take their seats, and important people like Richard Dunn to take their seats as well. We're going to resume our 80th meeting here, the Standing Committee on Finance, our second panel today on pre-budget consultations. We have another 6 organizations presenting in this panel, and I will read in order of presentation. We have, first of all, the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. Secondly, the Canadian Convenience Stores Association. We have the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions, the Canadian Steel Producers Association, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and we have McGill University. You each have 5 minutes maximum for your opening statement, and then we'll have questions from members of the committee. And we'll start with Mr. Severin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, thank you for inviting us to present our recommendations for Budget 2013. My name is Brad Severin, and I am the Chair-elect of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. Our organization represents 126 chambers of commerce, representing 23,000 businesses. We are Alberta's largest business organization. In submitting information for your July budget survey, we touched on numerous topics. For the purposes of this presentation, I will highlight 3 priorities, all of which relate to Canada's changing demographics and business realities. These topics involve enhancing foreign worker programs, encouraging older workers to remain in the labor force, and reinstituting severance transfers to RRSPs. I'll begin with foreign workers and their importance to sustaining Alberta's economy. The growing labor shortage is a constraint to our provinces and therefore our country's economic growth. The Alberta government estimates that by 2019, Alberta will have 114,000 more jobs than workers. The shortfall takes into account interprovincial migration, immigration, and greater labor force participation by underutilized segments of our population. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program was established to serve temporary labor needs for both skilled and unskilled employees. Many Alberta businesses rely on this program, especially for unskilled workers in the industrial, agricultural, and retail sectors, as they offer a stable, diligent workforce. Because temporary foreign workers are vital to sustaining our economy, employers want to ensure the program continues to operate as efficiently as possible. The Alberta Chambers of Commerce appreciates the steps the Government of Canada has recently taken to improve the system, and today we are offering suggestions that will make it even more efficient and reflective of our businesses' labor needs. We believe the temporary foreign worker program should be used to address immediate shortages while enabling foreign workers to use other immigration programs for permanent residency. Specific concerns Alberta employers express with the temporary foreign worker program relate to labor market opinion approvals declined without justification, the lack of an appeal mechanism for Service Canada decisions, changing application processes and vital information, national occupancy classification codes which do not adequately recognize and differentiate between skill levels, and barriers to transitioning temporary foreign workers to permanent residency. Our recommendations in this area are highlighted in the pre-circulated brief, and we draw your attention to those. Another pool of labor which greatly interests Alberta businesses is its older workers. As evidenced in a 2011 Statistics Canada study, Canadians are delaying their retirement. The Alberta Chambers of Commerce is keen to ensure the Government of Canada takes all measures within its powers to remove tax and other disincentives that discourage older workers from continuing to work past the age of 65, because many Canadians clearly want to do so. Federal retirement programs and policies such as the Canadian Pension Plan, tax-assisted private savings policies, and part-time pension policies do not reflect our country's current demographic retirement and life expectancy realities. We are recommending policy changes that address each of these realities. We recognize that these recommendations will have fiscal implications. However, with increasing life expectancies, removing financial disincentives for older workers to participate in the labor force could increase the age at which people choose to retire, thereby increasing federal employment income tax revenues and reducing overall government retirement program liabilities. So we recommend the Government of Canada, 1, expand the current 60 to 70 age range at which people are eligible to access their CPP benefits to 60 to 75, and provide progressive deferral incentives for individuals who access the pensions during the newly expanded range. Secondly, amend RRSP policies to provide greater flexibility for Canadians to save for retirement after age 72, and develop harmonized and flexible part-time pension policies that provide incentives for Canadians to transition out of the labor force after age 65.
1 minute remaining.
The final issue we would like to raise with this committee is severance transfers to RRSPs. Until the mid-1990s, provisions allowing for transfer of severance to RSPs permitted employees faced with difficult career changes to plan for their futures. In 1995, however, the Government of Canada changed the provisions related to the transferability of severance payments to an RRSP, citing the maturation of pension plans, the increase of RSP limits for those not in pension plans, and the ability to carry forward unused RRSP limits. Since then, employees who are faced with receiving severance pay as the result of job losses are also faced with large income tax bills because severance payments are taxed in the year they are received. A mechanism to defer tax on severance by allowing transfers of amounts related to post-1996 employment to RRSPs can resolve this issue of undue tax burden. The Alberta Chambers of Commerce recommends the Government of Canada reinstate provisions allowing for the rollover of severance to an RRSP without impacting the employee's otherwise earned RRSP room, and ensure that the amount of severance on an employee is allowed to transfer to an RRSP is updated by reference to today's contribution limits. Thank you, committee members, for inviting us to Ottawa to address these issues in person, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Severin. We'll go to Mr. Scholten, please, for your presentation.
Good evening. My name is Alex Scholten, and I serve as the president of the Canadian Convenience Stores Association. On behalf of the 23,000 Canadian convenience stores in Canada and the 183,000 people they employ, I want to thank you for taking time to listen to our concerns. It may surprise some of you to know that convenience stores contribute to more than $39 billion to the Canadian economy each year. They buy more than $26 billion worth of goods and services, and we serve over 10 million Canadians on a daily basis. We're an important small business stakeholder with unique challenges facing our owners and operators annually. I'll quickly outline three main issues facing our industry, followed by our recommendations for this committee. The first issue is the persistence of contraband tobacco in our communities. One of the primary issues impacting Canada's convenience store retailers is the continued trafficking and sale of contraband tobacco. The negative impacts resulting from the sale of contraband tobacco include lost revenue for government. There are millions of dollars lost by federal and provincial governments as a result of tax avoidance in this illegal industry. The Department of National Revenue has estimated this to be as high as $2.5 billion per year. The second impact is tobacco becomes more accessible to youth through contraband sales. Convenience stores must follow strict tobacco control measures designed to prevent tobacco sales to minors. Responsible retailers train and ensure their staff complete age verification checks. Contraband traffickers will sell to anyone who is willing to buy their products, and they often do so in schoolyards. Furthermore, because contraband tobacco is sold without collective federal and provincial taxes, the price is more attractive and the product is more accessible to youth. The third impact is contraband tobacco supports organized crime, putting communities at risk. As some committee members may know, the RCMP have identified over 175 criminal organizations that participate in this illegal activity, and that with seizures of contraband, police forces have also confiscated large quantities of drugs and illegal weapons. The Canadian Convenience Store Association is pleased to see the Government of Canada take the contraband problem seriously. However, we need to ensure that previous commitments, particularly with regards to enforcement, are followed through swiftly. This remains a key issue impacting our small business owners across Canada. We're also very concerned with the proposal to move the Cornwall border crossing and how this will significantly impact the issue of contraband tobacco activity. And we're not alone in this concern, having spoken extensively with provincial governments and the RCMP. If this move is made, increased enforcement around the Cornwall area is absolutely critical in order to prevent what we believe to be a significant increase in contraband availability in Canada. Second issue we would raise is credit card fees that negatively impact or negatively affect convenience store income. Canada's retailers currently pay some of the highest credit card swipe fees in the world. This has resulted from anti-competitive practices of the credit card companies. While convenience stores and convenience stores with gas stations net over $39 billion in national sales. This has led to approximately $825 million in net debit and credit card fees, which is almost as much as Canadian retailers make in pre-tax profits on an annual basis. The Canadian Convenience Store Association estimates that average annual costs in net credit card charges and commissions is in excess of $36,000 per year per site. This not only results in low profitability and higher operating costs, but contributes to slower economic growth and low employment rates within the industry. The third issue we raise is over-regulation within the convenience store industry.
You've got less than a minute left.
Okay. Regulation within Canada continues to expand annually, and this has resulted in declining growth and prosperity for small business owners. We've identified over 517 federal and provincial laws that impact the convenience store industry. Despite government's strong dedication to reducing regulation through federal red tape reduction commission, our industry continues to face many new provincial and federal regulations that will impact our operations. While we're not discounting the need for certain regulation, we certainly believe there's a need to consult with industry when regulation comes in. So in conclusion, we have three recommendations. First, that the Government of Canada follow through on commitments made in 2010 to establish new RCMP anti-contraband task force by the end of 2013 and implement mandatory jail time for repeat offenders the same date. Second, the Government of Canada reevaluate present regulations on credit card fees.
Let's wrap it up very quickly here.
Okay. And third, that the government follow through on their one-for-one rule announced in the red tape reduction strategy, ensuring that equally onerous laws are removed for every new law introduced, and the federal government take the lead on these initiatives with their provincial counterparts.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Ms. Foster, please, for your 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Pamela Foster. I'm a policy advisor with the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions. And I apologize on behalf of Linda Silas, our president, who was hoping to be here tonight but wasn't able to be so. And I'd like to thank the Standing Committee for the opportunity to share our views. We represent 156,000 nurses and student nurses across the country, and we work in hospitals and communities and long-term care and in the home. I want to focus on three issues today. I want to talk about improving patient safety and outcomes by addressing nurse staffing standards, moving beyond the hospital walls to support changes not only in Canada's aging population but in Canada's population health, and the importance of investments in early childhood education and care. So hospitals across this country are working at 100% capacity or more, yet the generally accepted standard of safe hospital occupancy is 85%. The results of overcrowding in our hospitals includes compromised care, high rates of hospital-acquired infections, unnecessary rates of hospital readmission. And another result is dangerous levels of nursing workload and the resulting vicious circle of nurses working short. 2 decades of national and international research have consistently demonstrated a clear relationship between inadequate nurse staffing and poor patient outcomes. Hospital-acquired pneumonia, urinary tract infections, sepsis, hospital-acquired infections, pressure ulcers, and gastrointestinal bleeding, medication errors, falls, failure to rescue, and longer than expected length of hospital stay have all been measured as a result of overwork. The link between nursing workloads and patient safety is as clear in long-term care as it is in the acute care sector. The more direct care, the better the resident outcomes. This includes lower mortality rates, improved nutritional status, better physical and cognitive functioning, lower urinary tract infection rates, fewer incidents of pressure sores, and fewer hospital transfers. And by now, I'm thinking some of you may be asking yourselves, what does the federal government have to do with nursing workload and safe staffing standards? So we're requesting that you consider implementing the Senate committee recommendation from their review of the 10-year accord that asks that the federal government establish a Canadian Health Innovation Fund to identify and implement innovative and best practice models, and this would include safe staffing models in healthcare delivery and the dissemination of those examples across the healthcare system. We'd also encourage the federal government to work with the provinces and territories on the development and deployment of data indicators to track nursing workforce and workload, including undertaking regularly the National Survey of the Work and Health of Nurses, which was done by Canadian Institute for Health Information, Health Canada, and StatsCan in 2005. And the Innovation Fund should also support workplace models that improve patient safety, should support the kind of innovations identified by the Premier's Working Group on Healthcare Innovation, and also innovations that involve integrating care beyond the hospitals. So you've heard at this budget consultation this year and previous years about the calls for a healthy aging strategy and a continuing care strategy. We echo in that recommendation. And as part of the national strategy for continuing care, it would be remiss not to look once again at pharmacare and access to affordable, safe medicine. We were encouraged that the federal health minister expressed interest in joining the premiers on bulk pharmaceutical purchasing following their meeting last month, the FPT health ministers meeting, and we hope to see some indication of federal leadership on bulk purchasing in this federal budget. And lastly, we recommend funding for a national early childhood education and care program. The nurses first passed a resolution at convention calling for a national child care program in 1991. Fast forward to 2012. I have 3 children. I live here in Ottawa. I spend $29,000 a year on child care. I'm able to do this, and I work 4 days a week. Okay? So I'm not even full-time, and I'm spending over 50% of my take-home pay on child care. Research shows that public investment in early childhood education and care pays off for governments and it pays off for families. Quebec has a child care program that serves about half of Quebec children under the age of 5. Nationally, Canada is about 20%. Quebec is at 50%. And the Quebec program has allowed an additional 70,000 women with young children to enter the labor force, which has led to a 3.8% increase in women's employment overall. And the ripple effect of this is incredible, with $5.2 billion to the provincial economy, increasing Quebec's GDP by close to 2%. Furthermore, the impact of working mothers' increased purchasing power and taxes means that Quebec recovers $1.05 for every dollar it invests in child care, and Ottawa another 44 cents. So nurses join with others in recommending that the universal child care benefit is actually pooled across the population, and that savings in terms of direct transfer is then used to assist provinces and territories to expand their accessible, affordable, and quality child care spaces. Thank you.
We'll hear from Mr. Watkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ron Watkins. I'm president of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, and we welcome this opportunity to present our recommendations for Budget 2013. The CSPA represents Canada's steel-producing industry, which employs some 25,000 Canadians with steel mills in 5 provinces. We generate over $13 billion in shipments, but our impact goes much further. We are integral to the major supply chains such as automotive, energy, construction, and mining. That is why we call for pro-manufacturing policies that will strengthen all industrial sectors. CSPA is a founding member of the Canadian Manufacturing Coalition, which last week released a 5-part manufacturing action plan for Canada. The elements are to support manufacturing investment, productivity, and innovation, to strengthen Canada's labor market, to strengthen Canada-U.S. economic integration, increase value-added exports and ensure rules-based trade, and reduce regulatory burdens. In my opening remarks, I will highlight certain fiscal proposals that are in this plan and in CSPA's own submission to this committee. First is to extend the Accelerated Capital Cost Allowance, or ACCA. We have strongly supported this measure since it was first introduced in 2007. It is a direct incentive to product and process improvements in manufacturing that will enhance our overall industrial competitiveness. The ACCA has been successively renewed at 2-year intervals and set to expire again in 2013. To provide the planning certainty necessary for large capital expenditures, it should be extended for at least 5 additional years. This will help Canada win new investment against other jurisdictions because increasingly we are competing for that investment globally. Secondly, in the area of innovation support, I'll talk about the SR&ED tax credit, the so-called SHRED. The SHRED tax credit is a broadly based incentive to industrial innovation. Budget 2012 introduced many changes to the SHRED, which, while designed to improve support for SMEs, can reduce the effective support for more capital-intense projects in larger manufacturing businesses. We are thus seeking measures that will restore support for such innovative projects, including the introduction of refundability provisions. Alternatively, the government could introduce R&D programs that would be applicable to such capital-intense large performers, thus helping to address the gap that has developed with the changes that were made. Third area is skills training. The growing skills shortages in Canadian industry are broadly based and well documented, and I sense this committee has already spent a lot of time talking about those. It is an increasingly expensive challenge for industry not just to attract new workers, but to retain and upgrade the skills of the current workforce as industrial processes become more complex and sophisticated. We therefore call for a new training tax credit to be financed from EI premiums that would help industry invest in further skill development of its existing workforce, thus preparing it for the competitive challenges of the 21st century. Fourth is to maintain an effective trade remedy system. The government has embarked on an ambitious round of free trade agreements and other trade initiatives. We actually support the direction of that policy where it will benefit on a net basis Canadian industry. But global trade is two-way, of course, and there is a corollary requirement, and that's to ensure that market-based trade will prevail in our own markets. We must and do compete at home under agreed trade rules, but exporters in many other countries, notably China, seek to achieve their goals by dumping products into our market. Left unchecked, such trade practices threaten Canadian jobs and jeopardize future investment.
1 minute.
Over 20,000 Canadian jobs and $7 billion in production are at stake. Both the Canada Border Services Agency and the Canadian International Trade Tribunal play key roles in restoring market-based trade. It is vital to Canadian industry that these agencies are adequately resourced to investigate unfair trade, to determine the appropriate remedies, and to enforce those findings against customs circumvention. That concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. We'll hear now from Mr. Sanger. Is that correct? Am I
Yep.
pronouncing your name?
Yep.
Mr. Sanger.
Thank you. My name is Toby Sanger. I'm an economist for CUPE. CUPE represents over 600,000 members who work on the front lines to deliver quality public services in thousands of communities all across Canada. The average annual salary for CUPE members is about $40,000, close to the Canadian average. And the average pension for those who have it is about $17,000. It's hardly gold-plated. Public services are important for our members, and not just because they take pride in providing them, but also because they depend on quality public services for their quality of life. Unfortunately, we are now in a situation where federal and provincial governments claim that we need to cut public services, lay off workers, reduce wages and benefits for fiscal and economic reasons. We know this isn't true. Canada's economy is growing much slower than it should. GDP is expected to grow at barely 2% this year and in the next 4 years. This is half the rate of previous recoveries. Job growth is expected to remain slow and unemployment to remain high. None of this is necessary. Austerity measures are slowing down the economy and increasing unemployment around the world. Even the IMF and the OECD are now telling governments to slow down on spending cuts because of the damaging economic impacts. Canada is in an increasingly fragile economic situation for two reasons. Unlike other countries, we haven't had a housing price correction. A housing price bust could easily drag our economy back into recession. Canada avoided a deep housing bust like the U.S. thanks in part to our publicly run mortgage insurer in the CMHC. Privatizing the CMHC, as a finance minister is planning, or allegedly planning, would be folly. The other major threat is if the United States proceeds with deep spending cuts and goes off a fiscal cliff early next year. This would cause another recession in the United States and likely one in Canada as well. Canadian corporations have more than $500 billion in dead money they aren't investing. With public spending cuts and slow wage and job growth, the demand isn't there. It's simple economics, and no amount of urging by the finance minister will change that. High rates of inequality help cause the financial crisis and are holding back the recovery. It's not just us saying this anymore. It's the IMF, the OECD, and even the Conference Board. So how can we achieve sustained economic growth? It's not that complicated. Federal government, we need to increase public investment and create jobs. The federal government needs to maintain and expand public services and launch a major public investment program to create jobs, increase long-term productivity, stimulate economic growth, and address social and environmental goals. The budget must include a program of long-term funding for public infrastructure with provinces and municipalities to meet existing and emerging needs. Incentives and requirements to engage in public-private partnerships should be eliminated, as these just increase costs for future taxpayers and generations. The budget should also include investments in affordable housing, public transit, affordable childcare, and a national energy retrofit program. Public service cuts of recent budgets have led to damaging and human and economic costs, reducing services for Canadians, and are fiscally unnecessary. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer recently reported, the federal government is now in a $25 billion structural surplus. We could also raise another $25 billion through some fair tax measures. We also need to support wage and income growth. Canadian workers and families are in an increasingly precarious financial situation. Household debt ratios are at record levels because wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living. Measures in the last budget requiring EI claimants to accept lower and lower paid jobs and allowing businesses to import and exploit thousands of temporary foreign workers at lower wages and requiring seniors to work longer to receive old age security pensions will suppress job growth, wage growth, while allowing corporate profits and CEO compensation to keep on rising. The EI system needs to be improved, increasing benefit levels. CPP and OAS need to be strengthened, not weakened. Doubling CPP benefits on a fully funded basis could provide all Canadians with decent and secure retirement incomes. To address skills gaps, we need to invest more in training and education, particularly in national workplace training programs, education for Aboriginal Canadians, and to ensure decent work opportunities for women, racialized workers, and disabled Canadians. Thirdly, we need to diversify our economy to become less dependent on exports of barely processed resources by providing support for manufacturing and development of key value-added industry sectors, as my friend has talked about here, so Canadians have the opportunity to work in decent jobs close to home. Instead of trade deals that sacrifice the rights of Canadians to foreign investors, we need fair trade deals that support strategic value-added industries, support higher wage growth with improved labour and social standards in Canada and around the world.
Okay.
Canada is a country of enormous potential and wealth in our land, communities, and people. There's no reason why we can't all share in growing prosperity.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to keep the time fair so I can have members' questions. Ms. Goldstein, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Standing Committee for the opportunity to present to you. My name is Rosie Goldstein. I'm the Vice Principal, Research and International Relations at McGill University. Canada's universities are strong contributors to the science, technology, and innovation agenda of our country. The top 15 research-intensive universities, also known as the U15, win the majority of competitively allocated Tri-Council funding awards. In 2010-11, this amounted to a total of 74% of funding, or $1.4 billion. In 2009, these universities graduated approximately 55% of master's students in Canada and 75% of all PhDs. Our universities also have an enormous impact on the economic well-being of this country. A 2010 CCOR study estimated the economic impact of McGill alone on the Quebec economy to be $5.2 billion, and this has grown since that time. Over the past several years, the Government of Canada has recognized and supported research and talent through investment in numerous seminal programs. While this support has been welcome, there are additional steps that we can take to ensure that our universities are able to continue to contribute to our society. In particular, we would ask you to consider support to research, infrastructure, and international partnerships. And I will take each one of those topics in turn. On the research side, Canada's 3 federal granting agencies, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, as well as funding organizations such as Genome Canada and the Indirect Costs Program, provide the foundational funding critical to supporting Canadian research. This funding allows students and researchers to explore a great variety of issues, such as treating memory loss in Alzheimer's patients, studying how baby boomer managers and corporate leaders are crafting their pathways in firms and businesses, exploring the links between living conditions in childhood and the effects on DNA that persist into middle age and beyond. Support for the 3 granting agencies has been variable over the last couple of years. Last year's budget announced reductions to the agencies over 2 years, that is for 2012 and 2013. Budget 2012 also announced reinvestments in the 3 councils' research programs that offset the 2012 budget reductions. However, for 2013, the councils are facing $37 million in cuts. We would ask for renewed, stable, and predictable support for these funding agencies, which are so critical to Canada's ability to address pressing health and social questions. On the infrastructure subject, in spite of recent investments by the federal government, McGill is confronted with an enormous infrastructure challenge caused by the disproportionate costs of deferred maintenance of its buildings. Over 30% of McGill's buildings were constructed before 1940. The last study, which dates back to 2007, estimates McGill's deferred maintenance deficit to be $648 million. We expect that amount will be revised to more than $1 billion when the next Quebec-mandated study on deferred maintenance is conducted in 2015. McGill's 2 historic campuses are therefore in serious need of sustained investment. Support for research infrastructure through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, or CFI, is essential for universities. Similarly, the 2009 Knowledge Infrastructure Program, or KIP, provided much-needed support for our infrastructure, and a second round of this program would be very appreciated and welcome by the university community, as would a more long-term infrastructure program. Finally, I want to talk about international partnerships and their importance. McGill is one of Canada's most international universities. Over 20% of McGill students are international, which is almost 8,000 students in all. In the last decade, McGill attracted over 1,100 outstanding new professors, almost 70% of whom were recruited from outside Canada. Over 150 of these recruited from outside Canada are what we call repatriated Canadian stars that had been recruited away from Canada in the earlier decade. We have an opportunity to capitalize on these international connections, but this requires key investments in internationalization, such as supporting study abroad programs for Canadian students, providing seed funding to support international research collaborations, and funding bilateral or multinational research initiatives. These efforts would allow undergraduate and graduate students to gain the international experience and learning that is necessary today in our global society. We could also build international and intersectoral partnerships, allowing us to not only strengthen the links between Canadian and international universities, but also between Canadian universities and businesses abroad.
Just briefly wrap up, please.
Sure. In closing, we ask the committee to consider renewed and growing support for research through the federal granting agencies and the Indirect Cost of Research Program, continued support for CFI, and additional mechanisms for funding knowledge infrastructure, such as another round of the Knowledge Infrastructure Program, and funding for international partnerships through support for student and faculty mobility, seed funding for collaborations, funding for multinational initiatives.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin members' questions avec M. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais commencer avec M.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Mr. Watkins. I'll just wait till you get set up. Well, perhaps I'll start with Mr. Schulten. Mr. Schulten, with respect to the issues involving the charges for credit cards that businesses have to pay, that they were among the highest in the world. Could you make some comparisons to other countries for us, please? Just how much it costs businesses in Canada to use credit cards as compared, say, to other countries?
And the rates to be across the world. The United States pays the highest rates anywhere in the world. Canada is a close second, and other countries have lesser rates above. The information that we have on our industry at $36,000 per year per site is very high. Unfortunately, we don't have comparative numbers for retail anywhere else in the world, so I'm afraid I can't give you that information.
De comparaison?
Comparisons?
I understand in the United States the rates are about 0.25% higher than in Canada, and below Canada it would fall somewhere in the range of about 0.5% to 0.25% as well, going up.
À quoi vous attribuez la cause, la différence?
How do you explain that difference?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know.
Monsieur Watkins?
Mr. Watkins, I enjoyed your presentation. There was a point that you didn't touch on with respect to economic development, probably indirectly with respect to productivity, has to do with infrastructure, particularly in the manufacturing sector and steel, among others. Would you agree that you're in direct competition with emerging countries, China, India, Brazil, a number of these countries that we have to be competitive with? And yet, in terms of infrastructure, my perception is that we are dragging compared to these emerging countries. Excuse me. These countries seem to be investing massively, whereas our investments are rather timid comparatively. Could you comment on the Canadian situation in terms of infrastructure, particularly for the manufacturing sector, and particularly with respect to export or production generally, compared to these countries that we're in competition with, whether they're emerging or otherwise?
I apologize, I wasn't ready a bit earlier. That's a multi-part question, really, and I'll try briefly to address each of the components. First of all, with respect to the importance of infrastructure or high-quality infrastructure, there's no question that's important to Canadian manufacturing because it can also improve logistics flows, which reduces shipping times and really enables a just-in-time economy. So we have certainly paid attention to studies which have tried to demonstrate where those gaps are, and the magnitude of those. There have been economic studies. There was a report, I think, released just earlier this year by the FCM, among others, about the importance of infrastructure investment. Secondly, and of course, infrastructure investment, very important to us as an industry because it consumes a lot of steel. With respect to emerging markets and their infrastructure investments, again, they have certainly invested heavily in that. Of course, part of that is in some respects, they're investing for the first time in a lot of that infrastructure. In our country, we have a well-established infrastructure system, granted repair and improvement necessary, but it's a little bit of apples and oranges on that score, I think, in terms of relative magnitudes. Thirdly, do we have to compete with those countries for selling, whether it's rebar, whether it's structural steel, whatever it may be? Absolutely. We have to compete with them every single day in our market, and we do so. And that is why in my remarks I also emphasize that we're quite prepared to compete on a fair market basis and in accordance to market-based trading principles. What we can't compete with are dumped and subsidized imports coming in from other countries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have two quick questions for Mr. Scholten, and then I'll have a couple for Ms. Foster. And you had a number that you put out in terms of the cost of contraband tobacco. Where did you say that number came from?
The number of lost tax dollars. The Minister of National Revenue has advised us that at State of the Industry addresses that we've had. So in 2010, Minister Blackburn had given us that number.
Okay, if I recognize it's a significant problem, but I had wondered where that reference came from. So if you have that and you could table it with the committee or send it to the clerk later, that would be appreciated. And the second question I have for you is, our government did introduce a code of conduct, and I know that it was very well received. And of course, we just recently expanded it to include mobile payments. And first of all, is that having some good effect for your industry? And are there enhancements to the code of conduct that you might recommend?
Yeah, we do believe the code of conduct did have some very positive effects. The concerns we have is that it's done little, though, to impact the high rates of credit cards. The practices that we've seen the credit card companies continue to operate under, bundling of services, contracts that aren't negotiable, whether you're a small independent or a large chain, those practices have resulted in very high rates that we have very little ability to negotiate.
Thank you. And probably a topic of conversation much too long for the few minutes I have remaining. I do have to make a quick comment in terms of childcare. Also, as a mother of 3 children who lived in a rural community, providing choices for parents is deemed very important. The other thing I think it's important to recognize, and I didn't realize this till somewhat more recently, the provincial government for our parents that are low income provides significant subsidy and support for the children to go into licensed quality daycare positions. So I was actually quite amazed at how significant the support was in that area. But I think where I'd really like to shift, because that's perhaps a much larger conversation than we can have right now, is I'm really interested. I appreciated your comments about challenges for nurses and really the role of the federal government. So what I would perceive there is, we've done a number of things. The forgiveness of student loans for the rural nurses and doctors, has that been helpful? Have you had any feedback on that as an organization?
We welcome that initiative and would like to see it expanded for other nurses and healthcare providers, not just working in rural and remote areas, but for ones upgrading their nursing degree, for example, to become nurse practitioners in other areas. And I'm curious about the uptake, and I'm wondering if the federal government also has data on whether or not that program has been used.
Perceive in rural, remote, perhaps nurse practitioners, it might be of you're suggesting.
Absolutely, and expanding the grants program and the support for RNs, for example, returning to school.
I think as a new program, obviously, it'll take some time to have the relevant data there. But you do perceive that will have some good impact in terms of dealing with that very important rural remote issue.
Incentives for rural and remote are important. It'll be interesting to see what the uptake on that program is, to see if it is a successful measure. And again, we would welcome further grant forgiveness for other
And there
nurses.
has, I know it would be nice to be looking at all the things in healthcare, because I think it's very, a very diverse and complex field. We had the Nurses Association that came before us, and they suggested a very bite-sized approach, and the approach being looking at 5 indicators and creating some goals. Would you, as the Canadian Federation of Nurses, think that that would be a good approach to at least starting to deal with some pan-Canadian bite-sized thinking?
The Canadian Federation of Nurses Union is supportive of the National Expert Commission reports, which includes the top 5 and 5, and that would be approach. The CFNU is also interested in seeing a national conversation between the federal government, the provinces, and the territories on a health accord, which would have longer than the 5-year scope, but probably the top 5 and 5 could feed into what we would hope to see in terms of a renewal of the health accord expiring in 2014.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Bryson, please.
And thank you to each of you for your presentations today. Mr. Severin, you spoke of the importance of temporary foreign workers in Alberta, but I can also echo in rural Nova Scotia for our horticulture industry, the importance of temporary foreign workers it's absolutely essential. And one of the arguments that farmers have made to me is that it actually, this perception that they take jobs from Canadians actually does not actually bear out scrutiny. When you evaluate it, that often what happens is there's a creation of more value-added jobs further up. And for instance, in the horticulture sector, as one example, if the crops aren't picked by temporary foreign workers, the value-added products can't be produced further up the, quite literally, the food chain or the value chain. And so there are jobs created in that, and I think that's an important argument. It's interesting, the theme of access to skilled workers and to professional trades. And one of the issues that this whole notion of training and retraining and lifelong learning is so essential, but something has happened over the last 20 or 30 years, and not just in Canada, but in a lot of the industrialized world, and that is the diminution of the honor of skilled trades. And we've moved away from that, do we need to, in Canada, have a national strategy aimed at restoring the honor of trades professionals?
and ensuring that when people are going through high school, that trades are presented in a very positive way as a potential career track. And is this something we should be dedicating scholarships, more fundings aimed at changing people's minds in terms of their attitude towards professional trades? And I'd be interested in your views on this.
I think the economic and labor realities bear themselves out. The demand for these skilled labor participants is certainly not felt anywhere more than in the province of Alberta. And I can certainly attest to actually the demand for those spots in post-secondary education. Our technical institutes, such as the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, are routinely taking wait list applicants to gain entry to these positions. I think that labor attraction, moving from one geographic area to another in Canada, certainly would bear out the demand for these very valuable skilled positions and skilled labor positions. Anything that the government can do in those areas where there's certainly pinch points as far as labor need is concerned for skilled labor is welcome, and particularly in our province.
And in terms of best practices, you look at Germany's model around apprenticeship and incidentally, Germany has less income inequality than a lot of other places, including Canada now. Any other thoughts on this imperative?
If I could comment briefly, first of all, I agree with the importance of exactly the point you're on, Mr. Bryson. And I don't know what the full solutions are. I mean, part of it, I think, even goes back into kind of the high school years. Right? I mean, it's actually making this seem like valuable, positive work going forward and great opportunity. And we certainly feel that in our industry and associated industries, the need to kind of get to a greater group of younger people earlier in their lives to to get them really prepared for its trades, its technicians, it's a lot of different areas.
I think offline, I'd like to hear from Ms. Goldstein in the future offline on that issue as well. But Ms. Foster, you raised the issue of early learning and child care and the importance of it, and we often think of it as to how it helps children develop their cognitive skills and long-term competitiveness around that question. But you raised the issue of helping women participate in the workforce, and that there was an article in The Economist in April 2006 called Womanomics, and stated that. But anyway, you're the importance to working women and to greater access to skilled women, for instance, nurses. I think that's a really wonderful argument that we need to hear more of.
Is this a comment? Because you've used up all your time.
Oh, so. It's become a comment.
Yes. I'll just remind Mr. Bryson has this wonderful habit of asking very good questions at the end of his time. Yeah.
Here, I can't see you without my glasses
on. Well, hopefully Ms. Foster will be able to return to that. We'll go now to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. I do want to start, though, with Ms. Goldstein. And I want to ask you, you talked in your submission about labor mobility and the challenges, particularly that new immigrants face when they come to Canada. Could you talk a bit about how you see our role as a federal government in, number one, alleviating some of those challenges faced by new immigrants, and number two, how we can help in terms of interprovincial mobility, in terms of labor moving from one province to another to go where the demand for labor is greatest. Could you please talk about that?
So thank you for the question. I think federal government has several places to make an impact. One of them I think is fairly obvious and where there has been progress, but I think there could be more in terms terms of alleviating the barriers to immigration, to licensing for professionals. There's a lot of work that could be done, and you alluded to the mobility between provinces in alleviating frankly, the bureaucracy and complexity of accepting the qualifications of immigrants. And also being a very international university, like I mentioned with McGill, we train foreign students, many of whom would like to stay here, and I think that we could make it a lot easier to, the qualifications are usually accepted, but from the immigration point of view, I think we could definitely streamline. Like I say, there have been improvements, but I think there is room for improvement, and certainly the licensing.
Could you mention specifically what you'd like to see?
Like I said, I probably could send you something. It would probably take longer in terms of the kinds of programs and comprehensively improvements. Certainly on the licensing for professionals and training, there really has to be a much more open and flexible, like I think in some professions. I'm more familiar with medicine. We've done some of that, but there's a lot more to do in terms of really evaluating external training in a reasonable amount of time and assisting immigrants with the complexities and bureaucracy. So I think that kind of program, that kind of support would go a long way.
I'm just switching gears a bit. In terms of our research and innovation that we've provided support for, we've kind of put in place the pillars for laying a good foundation for research and innovation development here in this country. How do we compare to other countries on that score?
So in terms of the amount of funds that we, as a country, invest in basic research, we score quite well. I think, and I think you know that. I think in terms of the funding the funding and the performance in the ladder, down the pipeline in research and development, not as well. And I think that we do need to. That's why there's a plea for the increased funding for partnerships, for international collaborations, where we don't score as well as other countries. So the output certainly of our basic research is also excellent. And I want to put in a little pitch for, we have set the foundation very well, and we appreciate that as universities, but it is threatened. It is not stable. And the investment is being cut back, and I think that compares unfavorably to other countries. For example, European Union is roughly doubling their investment in basic research in their framework 2020. So I think we risk our position if we don't increase our investment.
We're certainly moving in the right direction.
Well, I think we have been in the right direction. I actually think that in 2013, with the reduction, the $37 million reduction, without any reinvestment to compensate for that, we're actually going in the other direction. And so there are countries that are doing that, but I think it's not the wise thing to do, and certainly Europe is not. Europe and other countries are moving ahead, especially in these economic times, investing even more funds in basic research and universities, because that's where the future lies.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
1 minute, Mr. Adler.
Oh, thank you. That's just what I was looking for. I have a question for Mr. Sanger, and I'm hoping you can really help me out here, because I have a real problem. I was looking at your website, the CUPE website, and you got to tell me you got to work with me here, because I have a real difficulty. And I'm seeing page after page after page of resolutions, of statements, of letters condemning Israel from your union. Year after year after year.
Okay, question.
I don't see one condemnation, one letter, one word of condemnation of Syria. Can you please explain that to me?
Mr. Sanger, briefly on that point, please.
That's funny because I look at our website every day, and I frankly haven't seen pages after pages of that on that. So, and I don't think this is particularly relevant, but.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Marsden for your 5-minute round, please.
I need to take just a second, Mr. Chair, because we're living in real time, and I just got a real shock of that. I just got a text that a friend of mine just passed away in an ambulance on the way to the hospital 5 minutes ago, so I'm just a shade distracted. But this is an important opportunity for us. Mr. Severin, you talked about temporary workers, and Brian Jane, of anybody that talks about labor mobility, he's fighting for this and talking about it all the time. And we understand the short supply of labor in Alberta. But how can we call it temporary workers when it's just a cycle going around and around? Why don't we offer these people the opportunity to become Canadian citizens, bring their families here and build? But Mr. Watkins hit on something I think is really important, and it's good to see you again this year, sir. Red Seal tradespersons and this idea of a training tax credit to get them, because I know that it's a critical need that for those that may not know Red Seal, that's the highest level you get, and that's a guarantee of the quality of service the employer is going to get from these workers. So I want to thank Mr. Watkins for bringing that forward, and perhaps you two could have a conversation afterwards on it. You know, everybody's agreeing these days about the volatility of the global economy and the potential risk to Canada's economic growth. And this is an area, again, that's of significant importance to Alberta. What are your thoughts about safeguards, you know, that the federal government should take or to put into place to protect us from the potential of the Eurozone or even the worsening of the American economy?
I think that probably the greatest protection that can be afforded is one that's generated by true market movements. And if we have the opportunity for market diversity, I think that we create that protection. I think that by ensuring that we have the ability to open our economy, and particularly on the resource sector, not necessarily just bitumen or natural gas-based resources, but developing a consistent Canadian energy strategy that provides for market diversification of all forms of our energy right across Canada, oil, gas, potash, wind, water, all of these resources that we could have an opportunity to diversify our markets. I think that is our greatest protection, and having markets move in a freely operative manner.
Mr. Sanger, we talked here just the other day, we had witnesses talking about the relationship between labor in Germany and the government and training again. But Germany's also showing us what I think is the right mix of public investment and market solutions into a green economy. Obviously, education training is part of that, and it's good to have an economist here because you can give answers to questions, more questions than I probably have. What measures do you feel the federal government should take to move the Canadian economy and our society to a more sustainable level?
That's a very good question, and I spoke a little bit in the presentation about that. It makes a lot of sense for the government to increase investment in different forms of infrastructure. In terms of municipal infrastructure, I think we have a tremendous opportunity now to start to build a low-carbon infrastructure. I mean, these investments last for 30, 40 years. And so the original cities, New Deal for Cities and Communities, did have a provision over cities having to have sustainable development planning. That's really important. The retrofit program that the federal government used to have is excellent, and that can reduce the cost of energy as well, because you're making things more efficient. You're reducing the cost for users as well. A lot of countries have proceeded with that. I think it'd be excellent to have a retrofit program focused on the public sector, but also on the private sector too, to achieve some of those gains.
Area. We have Mark Carney talking about dead cash. We've talked about here $500 billion that's sitting there. The refit program, and that's something they quote the NDP platform to us regularly. One of the things we talked about was refit across our country, trains tradespeople as apprentices, and it also allows for some of that cash to get out and keep the economy going.
Okay, brief response, please.
Exactly. There's a great opportunity here, and I think this ties into the whole issue about a training strategy. The federal government has retreated from that, devolved it to provinces. I think it's really important, particularly if you're talking about interprovincial mobility, for the federal government to play a key role to bring labour and business together and to have a strategic view of the economy rather than the one that's just a reaction.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. I hope I get a chance to talk to just more than one. We have 5 short minutes, though, and I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Sanger. You're an economist. You would agree that you don't share every economist's viewpoint on your presentation.
Well, I cited the IMF, OECD, and I think a lot of mainstream.
But you don't share. As a matter of fact, I remember Harry Truman once said that he looked for a one-armed economist, because the economists were always saying, on the one hand, Mr. President, and on the other hand. So, and I, from what I understand, I'm not an economist. I wouldn't want to get into a debate with you. You obviously know a lot more than I do, but from what I understand, there's the Keynesian school from John Keynes, and I think the Austrian school from Mises. That's probably the 2 main streams, and there's people that go in different directions. What would you say is an acceptable level of debt to GDP?
Actually, economics doesn't really provide an answer to that. What you want is something that's sustainable in that way, and you can have an economy can grow with a certain level. The IMF has recently come out and said, well, actually, a recent report said that looked at a number of countries that had a debt to GDP ratio of over 100%. And
that's a little excessive.
Probably you want to bring it. You might want to bring it down from that. Canada's in a pretty good situation.
What do you?
Well, it depends on how you define it.
Well, define it with combined debt with the 3 levels of government.
I don't have those figures with me right now.
87%. Mm-hmm. So would you think that? And do you know what Canada's debt is as far as? It's national debt, just the federal portion?
Is it around, you might have those figures. It's I don't see it as being that important, about 500 or...
I think it's about 650.
Or 650, yeah.
So, and I guess what I wanted to say, and I don't want to criticize you, your credentials, but what I really wanted to hear from you is that the opinions that you expressed were your opinions. Is that fair to say, or are you hardcore? This is absolutely right. This is the direction we should go. Would you say that there's room for the possibility that you might be dead wrong?
Obviously, there are different opinions, right? But what I was citing was IMF and OECD saying that deep cuts and also spending cuts have led to lower economic growth. And the Conference Board actually came out with a report today saying the same thing. So it's not just me, but actually a majority of economists in the mainstream are saying that deep cuts are not good for the economy, and in fact, in some cases, such as the UK, they've led to higher deficits.
And again, these are opinions, and I know I could probably cite you people that say we shouldn't be cutting, as our government's doing. They say we should be taking a chainsaw to our spending. So there is obviously a difference of opinion, and that's the only thing I'm asking you to acknowledge. And would you agree with that there is a difference of opinion as to whether or not we should be cutting, or whether we shouldn't be cutting, or even go the one step further, we should be taking a chainsaw? Would you agree that there are economists that, I would cite somebody. Well, go ahead.
I think there are 2 points there. There's basically the macroeconomic one, which is the level of debt and deficit and the level of spending and how that affects the economy. And the second point is how you spend your money. For instance, public spending has a stronger multiplier effect than tax cuts. So it's not just the quantity, but the quality. Those are 2 important factors.
Have left, Mr. Chair.
30 seconds.
Very, very quickly, I'd just like to say the United States is, as you said, I think it's 120 at this point. They have rated just about everything that they can rate, and they're at a tipping point. I would think most economists would agree with that too. I'm very happy that this country, we haven't reached that spot yet, but we've taken a decision as a country, and I think in the last election too, that the people of Canada want us to wrestle this debt, and there's an industry would agree with that as well too. So we're out of time. But
interest costs as a share of GDP are about half what they were in the 1990s. The big issue there for economists is the interest rate in relation to GDP growth. That's the big issue. And we were told that as the debt and deficit increase, that interest rates would go up. They haven't. They've gone down.
Thank you. Merci. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Maille, please, for 5 minutes.
Canadian doctor for Medicare come before us just before you arrived, and I asked a question regarding the cuts to refugee healthcare. We from our side, we are opposed to those cuts. The government says that it's a cost measure, cost-cutting measure. But we know that the cost for Canadians or for Canada is more expensive, and that a lot of things are being downloaded to the provinces, to the municipalities. And I know from the other side we have the member from Kelly Block, Saskatoon, Rosetown, Bigger, who's really proud of that cut. What is your position regarding those cuts?
The Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions has participated in protesting those cuts, and we've written to the minister about that. We've seen the impact. We will see the impact in emergency rooms from these cuts, from not having adequate prevention provided, and it is a downloading to the provinces.
And in terms of provinces, but basically by saving those amount. Do you think it's going to cost more in terms of for society, in terms of waiting? You mentioned the emergency, but is it going to take more time and more cost again for provinces and for the society in general?
I don't have the statistics here, but there have been studies in regards to preventative illness and injury and savings that could have occurred if it had been treated in the primary health care system versus acute care system, and I'd be happy to provide those.
Well, because I just know that other associations, for instance, the College of Family Physicians of Canada, Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, I mean, a lot of associations are opposed to those cuts because it does affect and also maybe just a comment from our part, we understand, coming from Quebec, we understand how important the child care plan is in terms of how we should work with provinces, with municipalities in terms of making sure that happens. That's something we agree with and also believe in. Mr. Sanger, regarding the household debt, I mean, that is a big problem right now. We have the government really pushing towards temporary foreign workers, also saying that they're allowed, we have a law that says that we can pay them less, 10% less than regular Canadians. So it's, from our position, or from my position, it's a race to the bottom. And that actually affects, because in my writing of Brossard Après, we have people who have jobs, who are workers, but are now going to food banks. Can you tell us what's happening in terms of why the way the government's going in terms of just the position regarding maybe corporate tax cut and how that affects inequality and also how that affects household debts?
Yes, I was very surprised in the last budget that it included a number of measures that were basically corroding wages. The temporary foreign worker program, as you mentioned, was one of those. The new provisions on employment insurance. And I think that's both in terms of an individual worker's perspective, but also in terms of broader economic perspective. It's the wrong way to go. I mean, we're concerned about reducing overall household debts. Now in Canada, they're higher than they were in the United States prior to the crisis. So we need to reduce those overall debts, and there are a number of ways of doing that. But you also need to increase wages. And I think we're getting into a very precarious situation there. There has been an incredible shift from before households used to run surpluses. We think of the federal government of government deficits and surpluses, but the same thing happens in other sectors of the economy. So before 2000, households used to run surpluses and lend that to the corporate sector. Since the year 2000, that's totally reversed, and the corporate sector has built up over $500 billion of surpluses and or dead money that they aren't investing in the economy because people aren't buying their stuff. So.
I would ask you a question regarding investing in green technology and how that affects Quebec and McGill, coming from Quebec, but I don't think I have time, so sorry.
Perhaps we can follow up after the committee hearing. Colleagues, I have 4 more members who'd like to ask questions, and I will go now to Mr. Jean.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take up where Mr. Mai left off, actually, with Mr. Sanger. And I just want to ask you, first of all, is public transportation important?
Absolutely.
A great investment for the federal government to get involved with?
I think, we agree with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and yes, it's an important investment, yeah.
Okay. Did you have a chance to listen to the presentation by the public transit in Montreal, the Société des Transports de Montréal, just that came before us?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow it. I wasn't here for the presentation.
Well, on page 3 of that document that they presented to us, just a few minutes before you came, it says, and I quote, "Barely 10 years ago, the federal government was not even contributing to public transportation. Today, its contribution reaches almost $1 billion a year through various infrastructure programs," end quote. And they actually indicate that between 2001 and 2005, the total amount invested in public infrastructure was around the $900 million mark. And now with the federal government's initiatives through Economic Action Plan, which is obvious from 2006 to 2010, that amount is almost $4 billion a year now in 2010. Were you aware of that?
The federal government has certainly increased its funding for infrastructure, and that's a positive move. The problem is that it's run out, and we need a long-term commitment.
It's my question, and that's why, because from what you said, it was bleak and blurry about this government, and I'm glad to see you're applauding us for the $1 billion a year in public infrastructure. And I understand that's coming to an end, and we're talking, of course, to our partners to rejuvenate that for another period of time, and obviously we will do what's in the best interest of the Canadian people. My question is more driven towards the Alberta Chamber, and as a past member of the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce for many years, as a director as well, I have to tell you, I was impressed that you came here today and said, we have a problem with labor, but with that, I'm going to take a different approach. And CAP, I don't know if you heard CAP earlier. Good, you did. They indicated, although they recognize labor and labor mobility and bringing temporary foreign workers in, they recognize that without a distribution network for our natural gas and without a distribution network for our oil, we are in big trouble. And I'm just going to give you some figures very quickly. But they also indicated that to grow our economy is the only way to get cheaper price because it's a world traded commodity. Is that fair to say? You agree to that?
Absolutely. Market diversity for this nation, not necessarily just the province of Alberta, is critical.
Absolutely. And for the nation as a whole, because we all share in the great efforts of Alberta, Newfoundland, and wherever else we have a positive economy, correct?
Absolutely. The contributions that are made to the development of infrastructure and extractive infrastructure in particular, whether it be in Alberta or anywhere across the nation, the contributions that are made by provinces of Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, all of those provinces certainly contribute significantly to milling the products necessary to build these
the
things.
Extraction.
Yeah.
My question is this. We have 2.8 million barrels a day being produced, 1.7 million barrels a day produced in the oil sands, which is going to go up to 3.7 million barrels a day in the oil sands by 2020, and 4.3 million barrels by 2025 right across Canada. So we're going to double at least the production and distribution of oil. How are we going to send it anywhere? We can't even send it now without discounting our oil to the Americans by up to 40%. That's $40 a barrel. Now, how are we going to distribute it without some mechanism of distribution?
This really certainly brings into question the need for projects such as Northern Gateway. We absolutely need some means of breaking into market diversity and to creating that market diversity. In the absence of that, we are continuing to be price takers. with...
By that you mean we take whatever price the Americans give us for our oil.
Absolutely. And with all indications being that their move is towards greater energy independence by 2020, the potential for us to be in a further negative discount position by that point in time, it's certainly on the horizon.
Now, so you would also agree that this is one of the biggest threats to employment and to Canada's GDP in the future? That's the first question. I'm not going to get much time. But also, I don't know if you've extrapolated the figures, but based on the oil production that we have today and the oil production we're planning on having by 2025, that's 267,000 additional jobs, full-time jobs for Canadians. Does that trouble you at all?
Very briefly, yeah.
Yep, it certainly does. Without the ability to open our markets to create new customers for our resource products, certainly the ability for us to grow our GDP, to grow employment, to grow household incomes, all of those things are certainly constrained and threatened.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jean. We'll go to Ms. Nash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to all the witnesses. Welcome to the Finance Committee. I want to first ask Mr. Scholten about, I see he's got recommendations here on credit card fees, which we certainly agree need to be reduced. But I want to ask you about contraband. And how big a problem is that for convenience store owners, for your membership?
Yeah, it's a tremendous problem for our retail members for a couple of reasons. First of all, we as responsible retailers comply with the laws and regulations regarding the sale of tobacco. We work very hard on that and make sure that we are a partner with the health authorities across the country to be able to enforce those laws. Unfortunately, though, with the area of contraband, there's one law, but it seems to be applied differently in terms of those selling contraband. Canadian government and the provincial governments are certainly working on that, but it does offer a great frustration for our retail members. The second part of it is tobacco as a category within our stores, legal product for sale, contributes to the bottom line for retailers. And also, when someone comes into our stores and they buy that product, they typically buy other products as well. So when they're not coming into our stores and they're not buying those products, retailers have a great challenge in surviving.
An issue, I assume, at our borders, essentially, with contraband coming into the country. Is it a problem that the government has cut hundreds of positions at border crossings so that there are fewer inspectors to be able to determine if there's contraband or, goodness knows, drugs or guns or other things at the border? Would that be a problem for your members?
We do have great concerns about that, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Watkins, good to see you. Can you just talk to us a bit about the importance of the manufacturing sector and about the importance of being able to plan in your sector, in the steel industry, for investments? And I notice in your brief you're talking about wanting a 5-year commitment to the accelerated depreciation allowance and the importance of having a broader multi-year strategy rather than just kind of quick hits and budget to budget.
First of all, it's at least 5 years, just to be clear on that. No, first of all, we start with a very fundamental premise that manufacturing remains important to the 21st century economy. It is still over 2 million Canadians employed in high-value jobs across the country in a multitude of sectors. So what we look for are policies that are going to support and strengthen the manufacturing base across the country, different sectors. We're not looking for measures specific to our industry. We're saying if we can get a manufacturing direction in the economy, then that's beneficial certainly to us, but it's beneficial to Canadians. So we look to begin with, that's kind of a framework that starts with the tax measures of the kind we've spoken about, of having a competitive tax system, and we applaud the changes to the tax system that have been made to date. But beyond kind of the basic fiscal or tax environment within which we operate, then we look for in areas such as innovation and skills, international trade, sound environmental policies, transportation policies, and so on. So we think it's a package of things that has to come together.
Sorry, we have so little time. Mr. Sanger, I heard you reference the IMF, the OECD. These are not just some people with opinions. These are credible international organizations. In the case of the OECD, the largest developed economies. And would you agree with the Nobel Prize-winning economist Krugman, for example, and the OECD that austerity and overzealous cuts are a drag on economic performance? That's certainly what the Parliamentary Budget Officer told this Finance Committee earlier this year.
Just a brief response.
Absolutely, and I also agree with the IMF that said that, and they said that we need to focus more on growth rather than cuts in order to keep GDP, the GDP,
too, I assume,
exactly,
where,
growth and jobs,
earn a decent income.
And the IMF has actually called for progressive tax measures as well to reduce deficits.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nash. I have two more members who'd like to ask questions. Myself, Mr. Hoback. So, can I indulge the witnesses to stay for an extra few minutes? If you have to go, we understand that, but. Perhaps I'll pick up where Ms. Nash left off. Mr. Sanger, you talked about the need to avoid deep cuts. Can you tell me what a deep cut is?
Well,
just what percent it would be?
Well, right now, I think it's inappropriate to have any cuts in public spending and any overall cuts in public spending, which was instituted in the last budget, because that's slowing down the economy, and business is not picking that up, nor will
So any
consumers.
cut is a deep cut in your view?
Well, right now, it's inappropriate for the government, from an economic point of view, to cut spending.
Mr. Sanger, I'm just limited in my time. I'm just trying to ask very basic questions. So a 6% increase for health, a 3% increase for education, social assistance, increases in funding for research and development, the infrastructure stimulus program that happened, those would not be cuts, would they? They would be actually stimulative investments in this country.
Well, we supported those. The thing with the infrastructure program is that the money's all committed. That it's actually been that infrastructure spending is actually going down, as the conference board mentioned so far today.
Okay. See, I'm a former member of CUPE. This may surprise a lot of people. This is a problem I have, though, with unions like this, is there's absolutely no sort of balance saying, I understand you say you're critical on all sorts of areas, but why wouldn't you come and say, during tough economic times, increasing health spending 6%, education spending 3%, increase in social assistance 3%, increases in research and development funding, and the AUCC praised in the last budget. Like, why not at least balance it and say, on those issues, the government is doing well? Maybe that's a rhetorical question. Anyways, we can have this debate.
I've certainly commended this government on other things, for sure.
Okay,
yeah. We've only got a few minutes.
I look forward to those statements.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to move to the Alberta Chamber of Resources. I thank you, Mr. Severin, Mr. Colby, for being here today. You see some of the challenges. When I go back to Alberta, every single business, small, medium, and large, says to me, James, don't you guys, meaning me and others, get it in Ottawa of the labor challenges we're facing in Alberta? Don't you get it? I get it, but you see some of the challenges we have is there's an awful lot of people, for instance, on temporary foreign workers, who continue to believe that it's a program that allows businesses to take advantage of people coming from other countries. And Mr. Severin, I want you to deal with this head on, because I know it's not true, you know it's not true, but there's a lot of people in this country who believe that's why businesses want to expand this program. So why are you calling for an expansion in this program in your brief here today?
Very simply put, it's an Alberta reality. We cannot find the people that we need in order to fill the jobs required for us to continue to be the economic engine in Canada, which is, again, another economic reality at the moment. We have not seen the interprovincial movement of labor that we have seen in the past that may have filled some of those jobs that we now look to temporary foreign workers to fill. We do commend the government for the work that they have done, particularly in the EI areas, to promote interprovincial labor movement. But we think that those programs are going to take some time in order to be able to gain traction before we can start to feel the positive effects of those programs. The raw reality is we need people. Come to Alberta, the land of opportunity.
Well, the other thing we're working on is trying to get a lot of the work that's being done in Alberta, if we can, frankly, move that out to other provinces. I mean, I took a tour of southwestern Ontario in June to try to move some of the work that's being done in Alberta out to southwestern Ontario. That's obviously one of the other issues. I only have a minute left. I have a lot of other questions, but I did want you to, on your severance transfers to RSPs, we don't have time for it today. Can you perhaps provide our committee with more information? And then my last question, can you briefly address the issues with respect to RSP policies? Are you recommending that we move the age of conversion to RIF, again, upward as we did from 69 to 71? Is this what you're recommending on in your brief here?
Some of the recommendations we have around that reflect more of a staging, a ratioed approach, as opposed to a whole single-step movement to a higher age of transfer. For example, for those who are continuing to be engaged in the workforce, as opposed to disincenting them and locking them into a transfer or a required transfer, potentially looking at a staged transfer over the years that they continue to be engaged in the workforce.
Transfer from RSP to...
Correct, yes.
Okay. If there's anything further on that, we'd appreciate it. And my last point, just, Mr. Watkins, we've met on the issue with respect to trade, and I know you've given me some information as an MP, but if there's something further you want to share with the committee, I'd ask you to do so as well. I'm out of time right now, but if there's something further you could send to the committee. And we'll go to our final round is Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, I just have a few questions, and then I think we'll be done, folks. Mr. Severin, I'm in Saskatchewan. I have the exact same problems, and I'm happy you've expressed it the way you have for Alberta, but I can just copy word for word and say that's the same scenario in Saskatchewan right now, and that's why the frustrations that James feels, I feel, I know Mr. Jean feels also, because what's limiting growth in Saskatchewan isn't opportunity or money, it's people. And that's a huge one. But a question I wanted to get to, there was Ms. Goldstein. We talked with the University of Saskatchewan about attraction of foreign researchers, the type of people you really want in your research departments, in your education departments. I was wondering, intellectual property, is that a barrier, is that a hindrance at this point in time when it's bringing this research into Canada, or do you see any comments on that?
Is it a question of whether intellectual property is a barrier to bringing the people in?
Not a barrier. Is it something that the people are saying that our intellectual property rights aren't strong enough, so they're doing the research in other countries versus Canada, or do you have any comment in that regard?
So I can comment on that. I have to say that I haven't heard that directly, not at McGill in Quebec, from researchers. But we do hear it from businesses, and we hear it from other partners, international partners, that and certainly that they would like to see a stronger IP framework. And certainly from the pharmaceutical industry, I'm sure you know, that's something that they talk about. I don't see it as a, I think it is something that needs to be worked on in Canada. We need to be more progressive in our IP policies and also our approach to IP. And I think we're doing that.
I'll leave it there, Chair, in light of the time. Yeah, in light of the time, I think that's fair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoback. I want to thank our witnesses today. It was a very interesting, lively discussion. If there's anything further you wish for us to consider, please do present it to the clerk. We'll ensure all members get it. Colleagues, witnesses, thank you so much for today, and meeting adjourned.